Every year, over 3 million people hike sections of the Appalachian Trail, stretching 2,000 miles through America's oldest mountains. Most return home with stories of breathtaking views and personal triumph. But scattered among these tales of adventure are accounts that defy explanation. Whispered conversations in trail shelters about things that shouldn't exist, emergency calls from dead zones where cell towers can't reach, and photographs that capture something moving just beyond the tree line when nothing should be there. In 2019, an experienced hiker named Marcus Chen disappeared for 18 hours near Blood Mountain in Georgia. When search and rescue found him, he was sitting calmly beside the trail, claiming he had never left the path. His GPS tracker told a different story, showing him traveling 47 miles in a perfect circle through terrain that doesn't exist on any map. Marcus insists he only walked for 20 minutes before stopping to rest. The most disturbing part: his water bottles were still full, his boots showed no signs of the rocky terrain he supposedly crossed, and his camera contained photos of landscapes that park rangers couldn't identify despite decades of experience in these mountains. This isn't an isolated incident. From Maine to Georgia, the Appalachian Trail holds secrets that have persisted for centuries, witnessed by Cherokee tribes who considered certain peaks forbidden, documented by early settlers who spoke of pale figures moving through the woods, and now recorded by modern hikers whose technology captures what their minds struggle to accept. Some call them legends, others dismiss them as imagination. But the evidence is mounting. The patterns are undeniable, and the truth might be more terrifying than anyone wants to admit. What if the wilderness isn't as empty as we believe? What if something ancient still walks these trails, and we're the ones trespassing in their domain? I'm about to share 12 documented cases that might finally reveal what haunts the Appalachian Trail, and by the end, you'll question everything you thought you knew about America's most famous hiking path. Welcome to Verified Fears, where we investigate the stories that refuse to stay buried. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to face the truth, because once you hear these accounts, you'll never look at the mountains the same way again. The trail is calling, but something else is calling back. Story 1. The Whistling Woman. The Cherokee called her Asgaya Gigage, the whistling spirit who sang lost souls into the darkness. For over 2 centuries, hikers along the Appalachian Trail have reported hearing a woman's voice drifting through the trees, always beautiful, always haunting, and always leading them away from safety. What makes this legend particularly disturbing is how consistent the reports remain across generations, and how modern technology has finally captured what our ancestors could only describe in whispered warnings around dying campfires. Sarah Mitchell thought she knew these mountains. As a seasoned trail guide with over 15 years of backcountry experience, she had led hundreds of hikers through the wilderness areas of North Carolina and Tennessee. On October 13, 2019, she was conducting a solo scouting trip along a remote section near Clingman's Dome when she first heard the melody. It started as a faint humming, so subtle she initially mistook it for wind moving through the trees. But wind doesn't carry perfect pitch, and it certainly doesn't weave itself into lullabies that seem to know your name. The voice grew stronger as evening approached, transforming from wordless humming into a crystal-clear soprano that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once.
Sarah described it as the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, like a mother singing her child to sleep, but tinged with an ancient sadness that made her chest tighten with inexplicable grief. She found herself drawn off the marked trail,
following narrow deer paths that seemed to appear just as she needed them, winding deeper into sections of forest she had never seen, despite decades of exploring these mountains. What happened next defies rational explanation. Sarah's GPS unit, which had been functioning perfectly all day, began showing her location as a blank void. Her compass spun wildly before settling on magnetic north, then slowly rotating to point in the direction of the singing. Most unsettling of all, her satellite emergency beacon, a device designed to work anywhere on Earth, could not acquire a signal despite the clear sky above the forest canopy. She was effectively cut off from the outside world, following a voice that grew more insistent with each passing minute. The melody began to change as full darkness fell. The maternal comfort dissolved into something hungrier, more urgent. Sarah realized she had been walking for over 3 hours without rest, driven by a compulsion she couldn't explain or resist. Her headlamp illuminated familiar landmarks that shouldn't exist in this part of the forest. Rock formations from trails she had hiked years ago, now impossibly transplanted to this unknown location. The singing woman seemed to be reshaping the very landscape around her, creating a maze where Sarah's expertise meant nothing. Then came the moment that still haunts her dreams. The voice stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat echoing off the trees. In that void, she heard something else, the sound of breathing that wasn't her own, coming from directly behind her shoulder. When she spun around, her headlamp caught a glimpse of pale fabric disappearing behind a massive oak tree, but it was the footprints in the soft earth that made her blood freeze. They were human in shape, but wrong in every other detail. Too long, too narrow, with what appeared to be claw marks where toes should be. Sarah ran. Her 15 years of wilderness experience evaporated into pure animal panic as she crashed through underbrush, following her own backtrail by instinct more than sight. The singing resumed behind her, but now it carried notes of amusement, as if her terror was exactly what the voice had been waiting for. Every time she looked back, she caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, something pale and impossibly tall keeping pace with her through the trees, never quite visible, but always present. She reached her truck at dawn, though she had no memory of finding the main trail or covering the final miles. Her hiking boots were shredded, her clothes torn by thorns that had left no marks on her skin. Most disturbing of all, her camera contained 47 photographs she had no memory of taking. Images of her own face illuminated by the camera flash, but reflected in surfaces that shouldn't exist deep in the forest. Mirrors, dozens of antique mirrors hanging from tree branches, each one capturing her terrified expression from a slightly different angle. The story might have ended there, dismissed as altitude sickness or exhaustion. Induced hallucination, except for what happened when Sarah played back the audio recording from her phone. She had activated the voice memo function at the beginning of her hike, a routine safety practice to document her route. The recording captured everything: her initial commentary about trail conditions, the first faint notes of the mysterious singing, and then something that made her hands shake as she listened. For the final 3 hours of the recording, 2 voices could be heard: Sarah's, growing increasingly breathless and panicked as she responded to questions and comments from her invisible companion. But there was no second person on that trail. The recording captured Sarah having detailed conversations with the whistling woman, discussing childhood memories Sarah had never shared with anyone, answering questions about her deepest fears and regrets. Most chilling of all, the voice on the recording wasn't just any woman's voice. It was Sarah's own mother's voice, the mother who had died when Sarah was 7 years old. Park rangers found the location Sarah described using her GPS coordinates, but the landscape didn't match her account. There were no mirrors, no evidence of the deer paths she had followed, and no explanation for the photographs on her camera. What they did find were the footprints, dozens of them, in a perfect circle around a massive oak tree, exactly matching the strange elongated impressions Sarah had described. The prints appeared to be fresh, pressed into earth that hadn't seen rain in over a week. Sarah never returned to guide work. She moved to Colorado shortly after the incident, claiming the Appalachian Mountains felt crowded with things that remember us. But the whistling woman's story doesn't end with Sarah's departure. In the 2 years following her encounter, 17 hikers have reported hearing similar singing in that exact area. 3 have been found miles from any marked trail, claiming they followed a beautiful voice that promised to show them home. Park officials have since posted warnings about that section, though they attribute the incidents to acoustic anomalies and natural wind patterns. The Cherokee elders weren't surprised when researchers shared these modern accounts. They nodded, knowingly, and repeated the old warnings about Asgaya Gigagay, the spirit who collects the lonely and lost. According to tradition, she was once human, a woman who died searching for her children in these mountains over 3 centuries ago. Her love turned to hunger, her maternal instinct twisted into something that feeds on the wandering souls who venture too far from the safety of marked paths. But perhaps the most disturbing detail isn't found in Cherokee legend or modern incident reports. It's in the pattern emerging from decades of disappearances along the Appalachian Trail. Analysis of encounter locations reveals that the pale crawlers consistently appear near established campsites hours before hikers arrive, suggesting they can anticipate human behavior with uncanny accuracy. Trail cameras positioned at known encounter sites have captured footage of the creatures preparing for human arrival, clearing sight lines, positioning themselves for optimal observation, and even manipulating the environment to funnel hikers towards specific locations. The psychological impact on witnesses is consistent and severe. Every person who has had extended contact with the pale crawlers reports the same recurring nightmare, being pursued through endless underground tunnels by something that moves with inhuman speed while perfectly mimicking their own movements. Several witnesses have required psychological counseling, claiming they can no longer sleep in darkness without feeling watched by invisible eyes. Perhaps most terrifying is the pattern emerging from missing persons cases in areas where the pale crawlers have been sighted. Unlike typical wilderness disappearances, these cases share common characteristics that suggest predation rather than accidental death. The missing hikers were all experienced outdoors enthusiasts who vanished from established trails during daylight hours. Their abandoned gear shows evidence of careful examination, items arranged in the same methodical patterns observed at creature encounter sites. Search and rescue operations in these areas have been complicated by the discovery of elaborate tunnel systems that don't appear on any geological surveys. The tunnels are too narrow for normal human navigation, but perfectly sized for creatures that move on all fours. Most disturbing, the tunnels contain evidence of recent habitation. Smooth stone surfaces worn by repeated contact, chambers large, enough to hold human-sized objects, and scratch marks that suggest territorial marking. The pale crawlers represent something far more threatening than a simple cryptid sighting. They demonstrate intelligence, coordination, and an apparent fascination with human behavior that suggests predatory study rather than mere curiosity. Their presence along the Appalachian Trail isn't random. It's strategic, positioning them to observe and potentially interact with the thousands of hikers who traverse these mountains each year. What makes them truly terrifying isn't their appearance or even their behavior. It's the growing evidence that they're learning from each encounter, becoming more sophisticated in their understanding of human patterns and vulnerabilities. The question isn't whether they exist, but what they're preparing for as they continue their patient study of our species. Every hiker who ventures into their territory becomes an unwitting research subject, contributing to their expanding knowledge of human behavior and capabilities. The pale crawlers are still out there, moving through the darkness between marked trails, watching and learning with each passing season. They represent an intelligence that predates our understanding of these mountains, something that has been waiting in the shadows for us to venture deep enough into their domain to become subjects of their endless, patient curiosity. Story 2. The Pale Crawlers. Deep in the Virginia wilderness, where the Appalachian Trail winds through some of its most isolated stretches, something moves through the underbrush that shouldn't exist. They call them the Pale Crawlers, humanoid figures that navigate the forest floor on all fours with an unnatural grace that defies human anatomy. Unlike the folklore creatures of local legend, these entities have been documented by trail cameras, witnessed by dozens of hikers, and studied by researchers who refuse to publicly discuss their findings. What makes the pale crawlers particularly terrifying isn't just their appearance, it's their intelligence, their territorial behavior, and their apparent fascination with human movement patterns. The first confirmed sighting occurred in November 2017, when veteran hiker James Rodriguez was completing a section hike through Shenandoah National Park. Rodriguez had been hiking solo for over 20 years, documenting wildlife behavior for a nature photography blog that had earned him recognition among outdoor enthusiasts. He was familiar with every animal that inhabited these mountains, from black bears to the occasional mountain lion, but nothing in his experience prepared him for what he encountered during a routine evening at his campsite near Skyland Resort. Rodriguez had set up his tent in an approved backcountry site, following all park regulations and wildlife safety protocols. As an experienced photographer, he routinely activated his motion sensor camera equipment around his campsite to capture nocturnal animal behavior. The cameras were positioned in a perimeter approximately 50 feet from his tent, designed to document without disturbing the natural environment. What they recorded that night would fundamentally change Rodriguez's understanding of what inhabits the Appalachian wilderness. The footage begins normally: occasional deer moving through the area, a raccoon investigating his food storage, the typical nocturnal activity expected in this environment. Then, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, something enters the frame that makes wildlife experts refuse to authenticate the recording. A pale, elongated figure moves across the camera's field of view, but it's not walking upright like a human or moving with the gait of any known animal. Instead, it navigates on all fours with a fluid, spider-like locomotion that seems to ignore the normal limitations of human joint movement. The creature's proportions are disturbingly wrong. Its limbs appear too long for its torso, stretching and contracting as it moves through the underbrush with absolute silence. Most unsettling is its head movement. It rotates with an owl-like range of motion, scanning the environment with deliberate intelligence while maintaining its forward momentum. The thermal imaging camera captured its body temperature as significantly lower than human normal, creating a ghostly outline against the warmer forest floor. Rodriguez was awakened not by sound. The creature moved without disturbing even the dried leaves beneath it, but by an overwhelming sense of being watched. He described it as a pressure against his consciousness, as if something was examining not just his physical presence, but his thoughts and intentions. When he quietly unzipped his tent to investigate, he found himself staring directly at the creature from a distance of less than 20 feet. What he saw defied rational explanation. The being appeared to be human in basic structure, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was pale to the point of translucency, revealing dark veins beneath the surface like a roadmap of corruption. Its eyes reflected his flashlight beam with an inner luminescence that reminded him of deep-sea creatures adapted to perpetual darkness. Most disturbing was its face, recognizably human features arranged in proportions that suggested intelligence, but not humanity. The encounter lasted less than 30 seconds, but those moments stretched into an eternity for Rodriguez. The creature regarded him with obvious curiosity, tilting its head with bird-like movements as if trying to understand this strange bipedal intruder in its territory. Then, without any apparent effort, it began to mimic his movements. When Rodriguez shifted his weight, the creature shifted accordingly. When he raised his hand to shield his eyes from his own flashlight reflection, the creature raised what might have been an arm in an identical gesture. The mimicry wasn't mockery, it was learning. Rodriguez realized with growing horror that the creature was studying him, cataloging his movements and responses with the methodical patience of a predator analyzing prey. When he finally worked up the courage to slowly back into his tent, the creature remained motionless, watching him with that terrible intelligence until he zipped the entrance closed and huddled in his sleeping bag, afraid to move until dawn. Cherokee. Trail camera footage revealed the creature's behavior after Rodriguez retreated. For the next 4 hours, it circled his campsite in gradually tightening spirals, always staying just outside the range of normal human vision, but clearly visible to the infrared sensors. Most chilling was its apparent fascination with Rodriguez's scent trail. The creature spent extended periods at locations where he had walked, crouched low to the ground as if memorizing his presence through smell and touch. Rodriguez broke camp at first light and hiked directly to the nearest ranger station where his report was filed and quickly buried in bureaucratic procedures. However, his camera footage attracted the attention of Dr. Margaret Chen, a cryptozoologist from Virginia Tech who had been quietly documenting similar encounters for over a decade. What Dr. Chen revealed about the pale crawlers makes Rodriguez's experience part of a much larger and more terrifying pattern. According to Dr. Chen's research, the creatures exhibit territorial behavior that spans multiple states along the Appalachian corridor. They appear to maintain hunting grounds with defined boundaries, marked by scratches on trees and arrangements of stones that form geometric patterns. Most disturbing is their apparent coordination. When one creature encounters a human, others in the area seem to become aware of the intrusion within hours, suggesting a form of communication that researchers don't understand. The creatures. Intelligence extends beyond simple mimicry. Multiple witnesses have reported finding their campsites rearranged during the night, gear moved to different locations, food containers opened and resealed, sleeping bags adjusted to different positions. The changes aren't random vandalism, but deliberate alterations that suggest the creatures are studying human behavior and technology. Some hikers have discovered their backpacks repacked with items arranged in order of apparent importance, as if the creatures were trying to understand the hierarchy of human survival needs. Dr. Chen's most disturbing finding involves the creatures' apparent ability to predict human movement patterns. Analysis of encounter locations reveals that the pale crawlers consistently appear near established campsites hours before hikers arrive, suggesting they can anticipate human behavior with uncanny accuracy. Trail cameras positioned at known encounter sites have captured footage of the creatures preparing for human arrival, clearing sight lines, positioning themselves for optimal observation, and even manipulating the environment to funnel hikers toward specific locations. The psychological impact on witnesses is consistent and severe. Every person who has had extended contact with the pale crawlers reports the same recurring nightmare: being pursued through endless underground tunnels by something that moves with inhuman speed while perfectly mimicking their own movements. Several witnesses have required psychological counseling, claiming they can no longer sleep in darkness without feeling watched by invisible eyes. Perhaps most terrifying is the pattern emerging from missing persons cases in areas where the pale crawlers have been sighted. Unlike typical wilderness disappearances, these cases share common characteristics that suggest predation rather than accidental death. The missing hikers were all experienced outdoors enthusiasts who vanished from established trails during daylight hours. Their abandoned gear shows evidence of careful examination, items arranged in the same methodical patterns observed at creature encounter sites. Search and rescue operations in these areas have been complicated by the discovery of elaborate tunnel systems that don't appear on any geological surveys. The tunnels are too narrow for normal human navigation, but perfectly sized for creatures that move on all fours. Most disturbing, the tunnels contain evidence of recent habitation: smooth stone surfaces worn by repeated contact, chambers large enough to hold human-sized objects, and scratch marks that suggest territorial marking. The pale crawlers represent something far more threatening than a simple cryptid sighting. They demonstrate intelligence, coordination, and an apparent fascination with human behavior that suggests predatory study rather than mere curiosity. Their presence along the Appalachian Trail isn't random. It's strategic, positioning them to observe and potentially interact with the thousands of hikers who traverse these mountains each year. What makes them truly terrifying isn't their appearance or even their behavior. It's the growing evidence that they're learning from each encounter, becoming more sophisticated in their understanding of human patterns and vulnerabilities. The question isn't whether they exist, but what they're preparing for as they continue their patient study of our species. Every hiker who ventures into their territory becomes an unwitting research subject, contributing to their expanding knowledge of human behavior and capabilities. The pale crawlers are still out there, moving through the darkness between marked trails, watching and learning with each passing season. They represent an intelligence that predates our understanding of these mountains, something that has been waiting in the shadows for us to venture deep enough into their domain to become subjects of their endless patient curiosity. Story 3. The Time Slips. Time is supposed to be constant, flowing forward at an unchanging pace that governs every aspect of our existence. But along certain sections of the Appalachian Trail, this fundamental law of reality becomes negotiable. Hikers enter these zones expecting a routine day on the trail and emerge hours, days, or even weeks later with no memory of the missing time. Others experience the opposite, living through days of hiking only to discover that minutes have passed in the outside world. These aren't simple cases of disorientation or altitude sickness. These are documented temporal anomalies that challenge our understanding of space and time itself, and they're becoming more frequent with each passing year. Dr. Elena Vasquez, first, encountered the phenomenon during what should have been a straightforward research expedition in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. As a quantum physicist from Johns Hopkins University, she was conducting experiments on gravitational time dilation using atomic clocks positioned at different elevations along the trail. Her research was routine, measuring minute variations in time's passage at different altitudes to confirm Einstein's theories of relativity. What she discovered instead was evidence that time itself is broken in specific locations along the Appalachian corridor. On September 15, 2018, Dr. Vasquez positioned synchronized atomic clocks at 5 different points along a 12-mile section of trail near Shenandoah National Park. These devices are accurate to within 1 second every 15 billion years, making them perfect instruments for detecting even the smallest temporal variations. Her plan was simple: hike between the clock positions over a 3-day period, recording their readings to document the expected time dilation effects of elevation changes. The first anomaly occurred at mile marker 47, where a dense grove of ancient oak trees creates a natural cathedral of interwoven branches. Dr. Vasquez approached this location at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, according to her GPS watch, which was synchronized with the atomic clock network. She spent what felt like 10 minutes examining the area, taking photographs and environmental readings before continuing to the next measurement point. When she arrived at mile marker 49, her synchronized equipment showed a discrepancy that defied explanation. According to every timepiece she carried, including her GPS watch, smartphone, and backup chronometer, she had spent 3 hours and 47 minutes covering the 2-mile distance between markers. But Dr. Vasquez's own perception of time insisted that only 10 minutes had passed. More disturbing, her camera's timestamp function recorded photographs taken during those missing hours. Images she had no memory of capturing, showing locations she had never seen despite hiking this trail section multiple times during her research preparation. The photographs revealed impossible landscapes, the same oak grove from dozens of different angles, but showing seasonal changes that couldn't exist simultaneously. Some images showed the trees in full autumn foliage, while others captured them bare of leaves, as if winter had touched only certain branches. Most unsettling were the photographs that appeared to show Dr. Vasquez herself, taken from angles suggesting someone else was holding her camera, documenting her movements through those lost hours. Determined to understand what had happened, Dr. Vasquez returned to the same location the following day with additional monitoring equipment. This time, she positioned motion sensor cameras throughout the oak grove and carried a digital voice recorder to document her experiences. What the equipment captured during her second visit provided evidence of temporal distortion that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself. The motion sensors recorded Dr. Vasquez entering the grove at 2:15 p.m. exactly as her timepieces indicated. However, the cameras then documented her presence in multiple locations simultaneously, walking different paths through the same area, sometimes moving in directions that contradicted her actual route. The timestamp data showed her occupying the same space at different times, as if multiple versions of herself were exploring the grove during overlapping temporal windows. The audio recording captured something even more disturbing. Dr. Vasquez's voice could be heard conducting normal documentation of her research, but layered beneath her spoken observations was another track, her own voice having completely different conversations, discussing events that hadn't happened yet and referencing equipment she hadn't brought on this expedition. Most chilling was a portion of the recording where her voice could be heard responding to questions asked by someone else, but only her side of the conversation was audible. During this second visit, Dr. Vasquez experienced what she described as temporal echoes, brief moments where she could see ghostly impressions of her previous day's activities superimposed over her current surroundings. She watched herself from the day before, examining the same tree she was currently studying, both versions existing simultaneously in the same space, but separated by the thin membrane of 24 hours. The effect was nauseating and disorienting, as if time itself was developing double vision. The atomic clocks positioned throughout the research area recorded data that violated the known laws of physics, while the clocks at the beginning and end of the trail section maintained perfect synchronization. The three devices positioned within the temporal anomaly zone showed readings that drifted wildly from the baseline. Most significantly, the clock positioned at the center of the oak grove ran backward for 17 minutes during Dr. Vasquez's second visit, recording negative time passage while she was present in the area. Dr. Vasquez's research attracted the attention of other scientists who had been quietly investigating similar phenomena along the Appalachian Trail. Dr. Michael Chen, a neurologist from Duke University, had been documenting cases of temporal displacement among hikers for over 5 years. His findings revealed a pattern of incidents that stretched from Georgia to Maine, concentrated in areas where the trail passes through ancient geological formations that predate human civilization by millions of years. According to Dr. Chen's research, the temporal anomalies aren't random events but follow predictable patterns tied to geological and astronomical cycles. The incidents occur most frequently during specific lunar phases and concentrate in areas where the trail crosses fault lines, underground water systems, or locations with unusual magnetic properties. Most disturbing is the discovery that the affected areas are expanding. Zones of temporal distortion that measured only a few hundred feet in diameter 5 years ago now encompass entire trail sections spanning multiple miles. The human cost of these temporal anomalies extends beyond simple lost time. Hikers who experience significant temporal displacement report lasting psychological effects that persist long after their trail experiences. They described feeling disconnected from linear time, experiencing memories of events that haven't happened yet, and suffering from a condition Dr. Chen terms temporal vertigo, the inability to maintain a consistent sense of present moment awareness. Missing persons cases in temporal anomaly zones present unique challenges for search and rescue operations. Standard procedures assume that missing hikers are somewhere in the physical search area, but temporal displacement means that victims might exist in the same location at a different time. Search teams have reported finding evidence of missing hikers, fresh footprints, abandoned gear, even voices calling for help, but no physical presence. These ghost traces suggest that the missing persons might be trapped in temporal bubbles existing parallel to our timeline but unable to reconnect with the present moment. The most terrifying case involved a family of 4 who entered a temporal anomaly zone near Mount Katahdin in Maine during the summer of 2020. Park rangers found their abandoned campsite with evidence of recent occupation, warm ashes in the fire pit, food still cooking on portable stoves, and personal belongings arranged, as if the family had simply stepped away for a few minutes. Security cameras at the trailhead showed them entering the area but never leaving. However, their voices could be heard calling for help from within the forest for 3 weeks after their disappearance, always moving location but never getting closer to potential rescuers. Dr. Vasquez's most recent research has uncovered evidence that the temporal anomalies are intensifying and becoming more frequent. Her atomic clock network now detects temporal distortions occurring daily rather than weekly, and the magnitude of time displacement is increasing. Most alarming is the discovery that some areas of the trail are beginning to experience what she terms temporal fragmentation, locations where multiple time streams exist simultaneously, creating pockets of reality where past, present, and future overlap in impossible ways. The implications of these findings extend far beyond individual hiking experiences. If time itself is becoming unstable along the Appalachian Trail, it suggests that something fundamental about the nature of reality is changing in these ancient mountains. The trail follows paths that have been used by humans for thousands of years, crossing geological formations that have existed for millions of years. Perhaps our constant passage through these areas has begun to wear thin the fabric of space-time itself, creating tiers that allow different temporal periods to bleed through into our present reality. What makes the time slips truly terrifying isn't just the lost hours or displaced memories. It's the growing evidence that time moves differently in these mountains, flowing backward and forward like a river with hidden currents that can sweep the unwary into temporal waters they might never escape. Every hiker who enters these areas risks becoming unstuck in time, trapped between moments that no longer connect to the linear progression of normal reality. The question isn't whether you'll experience a time slip on the Appalachian Trail. It's whether you'll be able to find your way back to the timeline you left behind. Story number 4. The Shadow People. They move just beyond the edge of vision, dark silhouettes that mirror your every step through the forest. At first, you dismiss them as tricks of light filtering through dense canopy, shadows cast by swaying branches that create the illusion of movement where none should exist. But the shadow people of the Appalachian Trail aren't optical illusions or figments of exhausted imagination. They're entities that have been documented by hundreds of hikers over the past decade, growing bolder and more numerous with each passing season. What makes them truly terrifying isn't what they do. It's what they seem to be preparing for as they continue their relentless observation of human activity along America's most famous hiking trail. Rebecca Torres learned about the shadow people during what was supposed to be a therapeutic solo hike following her divorce. As a trauma counselor from Atlanta, she understood the healing power of wilderness solitude and had chosen a remote section of the trail in North Georgia specifically for its reputation as a place of peace and reflection. She was seeking isolation to process her life changes, but what she found was the unsettling sensation of constant companionship from entities that maintained perfect parallel movement just beyond her ability to observe them directly. The first sign appeared on her second day, during a routine rest stop at Neal's Gap. Rebecca had positioned herself on a rock outcropping that provided panoramic views of the surrounding forest, using the elevated vantage point to photograph the autumn foliage for her personal journal. While reviewing the images on her camera's display screen, she noticed something that made her question her own perception of reality. In every photograph that captured forest depths, dark vertical shapes appeared among the trees, too tall and narrow to be natural shadows, too consistent in their positioning to be random light patterns. These shapes weren't visible to her naked eye when she looked directly at the same locations, but the camera captured them with disturbing clarity. They appeared humanoid in basic structure but wrong in proportion, elongated figures that seemed to stretch upward beyond normal human height while maintaining a thinness that suggested they were more shadow than substance. Most unsettling was their positioning. They appeared to be observing her from multiple angles simultaneously, creating a surveillance network that encompassed her entire rest area. Rebecca initially dismissed the photographic anomalies as camera malfunctions or digital artifacts, but the pattern became impossible to ignore as she continued her hike. Every photograph she took contained the same dark figures, always positioned at the edges of the frame, always oriented toward her location. They appeared in images taken at different times of day, in varying light conditions, and from different camera angles. The consistency suggested intelligence rather than random occurrence. These entities were deliberately positioning themselves to remain just outside direct observation while maintaining constant visual contact with her movements. The psychological impact began subtly. Rebecca found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, responding to peripheral movement that vanished the moment she turned to investigate. The sensation of being watched became so intense that she started taking photographs specifically to document what her eyes couldn't directly perceive. The camera revealed a disturbing truth. The shadow people weren't just observing her, they were coordinating their movements to maintain optimal surveillance angles as she progressed along the trail. By her third day, the entity's behavior had evolved from passive observation to active interaction. Rebecca discovered that the shadow people responded to her movements with uncanny precision. When she stopped to rest, they stopped. When she changed direction, they adjusted their positions accordingly. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to anticipate her decisions. The camera captured them moving to new positions before she had consciously decided to change her route, as if they could read her intentions before she acted on them. Catchise. Breakthrough in understanding their nature came when Rebecca accidentally left her camera recording while taking an extended lunch break. The 47-minute video file revealed behavior that transformed her perception of these entities from mysterious phenomena to organized intelligence. The shadow people didn't simply maintain static observation. They communicated with each other through movements that resembled a complex form of nonverbal language. The recorded footage showed the dark figures shifting positions in coordinated patterns that followed no natural explanation. When one entity moved closer to Rebecca's location, others adjusted their positions to maintain sightlines and coverage angles. They appeared to be sharing information about her behavior, equipment, and physical capabilities through gestural communications that suggested sophisticated intelligence and planning. Most chilling was a sequence where the entities seemed to be practicing formations, rehearsing coordinated movements for unknown purposes. Rebecca's growing paranoia was validated when she attempted to deviate from established trail routes. Every time she considered leaving the marked path, whether to investigate interesting rock formations or to find private camping spots, the shadow people increased their activity levels dramatically. The camera captured them moving with urgent purpose, repositioning themselves to block potential escape routes and funnel her back toward the main trail. Their behavior suggested they weren't just observing her journey, but actively managing it, according to criteria she couldn't understand. The entity's influence extended beyond visual stalking. Rebecca began experiencing vivid dreams where she walked through endless forest corridors while dark figures watched from the periphery of her vision. The dreams felt more real than her waking experiences, filled with sounds and sensations that lingered after she awoke. Most disturbing were the dreams where she could hear the shadow people communicating about her in whispered conversations just beyond her ability to understand, discussing her progress and potential in terms that suggested she was being evaluated for unknown purposes. Dr. Patricia Williams, a paranormal researcher from Appalachian State University, has been studying shadow people encounters for over 8 years. Her research reveals that these entities represent a phenomenon unique to the Appalachian Trail corridor, with sighting reports concentrated in areas where the trail passes through geological formations that contain high concentrations of quartz crystal. Dr. Williams theorizes that these mineral deposits might create electromagnetic conditions that allow interdimensional entities to manifest in our reality as observable shadows. According to Dr. Williams' data, shadow people encounters follow predictable patterns that suggest organized behavior rather than random manifestations. The entities appear most frequently to solo hikers during daylight hours, maintaining observation distances that keep them just beyond the range of normal human peripheral vision. They demonstrate clear intelligence in their surveillance techniques, using natural terrain features to maintain concealment while optimizing their observation angles of human targets. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Williams's research involves the correlation between shadow people activity and missing persons cases along the Appalachian Trail. Analysis of disappearance patterns reveals that hikers who report extensive shadow people encounters are significantly more likely to vanish within 72 hours of their initial sighting. These aren't random correlations. The data suggests that intensive shadow surveillance might be a precursor to some form of targeted abduction or intervention. Witness testimonies describe a consistent escalation pattern in shadow people behavior. Initial encounters involve passive observation from fixed positions. As surveillance continues, the entities begin coordinating their movements and responding to human actions. The final stage involves active interference with human navigation. Witnesses report feeling compelled to follow specific routes, discovering that alternative paths have become impassable or disorienting, and experiencing navigation equipment malfunctions that force them toward predetermined destinations. Rebecca's experience reached this final stage on her 4th day, when her GPS device began providing directions that didn't match her intended route. The device consistently guided her toward a remote valley that didn't appear on any official trail maps, while her compass spun wildly whenever she attempted to verify her direction using traditional navigation methods. The Shadow People's activity reached fever pitch during this period, with dozens of dark figures visible in every photograph she took, positioned in formations that suggested they were herding her toward the mysterious valley location. The psychological pressure became unbearable when Rebecca realized that the Shadow People had begun manifesting during her peripheral vision, even when she wasn't using the camera. Dark shapes moved constantly at the edges of her sight, creating a sense of being surrounded by entities that existed in the liminal space between perception and reality. She found herself unable to focus on anything except the constant movement in her peripheral vision, creating a state of hypervigilance that left her exhausted and disoriented. Rebecca ultimately escaped the Shadow People's influence by abandoning her planned route and hiking directly to the nearest road, where she flagged down a passing vehicle and requested immediate evacuation from the area. Her final photographs, taken as she reached the road, showed the Shadow People gathered at the forest edge. Dozens of dark figures arranged in perfect formation, watching her departure with what appeared to be disappointment rather than relief. The Shadow People represent something far more sinister than simple wilderness spirits or interdimensional observers. Their organized behavior, surveillance techniques, and apparent ability to influence human navigation suggest they serve a specific purpose related to human activity along the Appalachian Trail. Each encounter provides them with additional data about human behavior, navigation patterns, and psychological responses to prolonged observation. What makes them truly terrifying is the growing evidence that they're preparing for something larger than individual encounters. The increase in sighting frequency, the evolution of their surveillance techniques, and the correlation with missing persons cases suggest that the Shadow People aren't just observing human hikers, they're studying us with the methodical patience of entities that understand time differently than we do. Every photograph that captures their presence, every hiker who reports their surveillance, contributes to their expanding database of human behavioral patterns and vulnerabilities. The question isn't whether the Shadow People exist in the spaces between light and darkness along the Appalachian Trail. The question is what they're planning to do with all the information they've gathered about us, and whether their patient observation phase is nearing its end. They continue to watch from the edges of perception, documenting our movements and learning our weaknesses with each passing season, preparing for a purpose that remains as dark and mysterious as the shadows they inhabit. Story number 5. The Cherokee Warnings. Long before the Appalachian Trail existed as a recreational pathway, the Cherokee Nation understood that certain peaks in these ancient mountains were forbidden territory. They called them Envi Asgaya, the places where spirits dwell. And for over 1,000 years, tribal law prohibited anyone from venturing onto these sacred heights, except under the most desperate circumstances. The Cherokee didn't create these restrictions out of superstition or primitive fear. They established them because their ancestors had learned, through bitter experience and devastating loss, that some mountains harbor entities that view human presence as an intrusion punishable by consequences that extend far beyond simple death. Joseph Crow Feather serves as a cultural liaison between the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and the National Park Service, working to preserve traditional knowledge about the spiritual significance of Appalachian landscapes. His great-grandfather, Samuel Crow Feather, was one of the last Cherokee to receive formal training in the old ways before European colonization disrupted traditional education systems. The knowledge Samuel passed down through 4 generations includes detailed maps of forbidden territories, specific protocols for avoiding spiritual contamination, and most importantly, warnings about what happens to those who ignore ancient boundaries that were established through centuries of tragic experience. According to Joseph, the Cherokee understanding of dangerous peaks isn't based on folklore or metaphorical teachings. It's practical survival information encoded in ceremonial language to ensure accurate transmission across generations. The Forbidden Mountains aren't randomly designated sacred sites, but specific locations where the Cherokee documented encounters with entities they called Kituwa Nightland, beings that exist in the spaces between the physical and spiritual worlds, capable of influencing reality in ways that defy natural law. The most extensively documented Forbidden Peak lies along what is now the Appalachian Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, where Clingman's Dome rises above the surrounding forest like a massive burial mound. Cherokee oral tradition describes this mountain as a gateway location where the Nightland beings first emerged into our world during a catastrophic event that occurred approximately 800 years ago. The traditional account describes the sky turning black during daylight hours, followed by the appearance of beings that could manipulate physical matter through will alone, reshaping the landscape and trapping Cherokee hunting parties in maze-like terrain that appeared overnight. Joseph's great-grandfather left detailed written records of the Clingman's Dome incident, translated from Cherokee into English during the 1940s to preserve the knowledge for future generations. According to Samuel's account, a Cherokee hunting party of 12 experienced warriors entered the Clingman's Dome area during the autumn of 1847, despite knowing the traditional prohibitions, because severe winter weather had driven game animals to higher elevations, and the tribal community faced starvation. The hunting party established a base camp at the mountain's lower elevations and spent 3 days tracking deer herds toward the Forbidden Peak. On the fourth day, they discovered that the landscape around Clingman's Dome had changed overnight. Familiar valleys had disappeared, replaced by deep ravines that hadn't existed the previous evening. Rock formations they had used as navigation landmarks were found in different locations, arranged in geometric patterns that suggested intelligent manipulation rather than natural geological processes. Most disturbing was the discovery that their own trail markers, carefully placed stones and carved symbols that Cherokee hunters used to navigate unfamiliar territory, had been rearranged into messages written in an unknown symbolic language. The symbols appeared to be warnings or instructions, but they were composed using Cherokee trail markers arranged according to principles that no tribal member could interpret. Someone or something had not only observed their marking system, but was using it to communicate concepts that existed outside Cherokee understanding. The hunting party's leader, a respected tracker named Sequoia Bell, made the decision to continue toward the peak despite the obvious supernatural intervention. According to Samuel Crow Feather's written account, Bell believed that the Nightland beings were testing their resolve, and that showing courage in the face of spiritual challenge would earn their respect and permission to hunt in the area. This decision would prove to be a fatal misunderstanding of the entity's true nature and intentions. What happened next challenges the boundary between documented history and supernatural horror. The hunting party encountered what Samuel's account describes as moving mountains, rock formations that shifted position when not directly observed, creating an ever-changing maze that made navigation impossible. Streams flowed uphill, depositing water in locations that defied gravity. Trees grew in perfect geometric patterns overnight, forming natural corridors that led the hunters deeper into areas where the normal laws of physics appeared to be suspended. The Nightland beings themselves remained largely invisible, manifesting as disturbances in the environment rather than direct physical presence. The hunters reported seeing their own reflections in standing water that showed them performing actions they hadn't taken, walking in directions they hadn't chosen, and speaking words they hadn't uttered. Most terrifying was the discovery that these reflected selves were making decisions independently, leading them toward locations they had no intention of visiting. 3 members of the hunting party disappeared during the second night on the Forbidden Peak. Their sleeping furs were found neatly arranged around a cold fire pit, with no evidence of struggle or departure. Most disturbing was the discovery of their footprints leading directly into solid rock faces, as if the mountain had opened to receive them and then sealed itself seamlessly. The remaining hunters could hear their missing companions calling for help from within the mountain, but the voices seemed to come from different directions simultaneously, suggesting the disappeared men existed in multiple locations at once. Sequoia. Bell made the decision to abandon the hunt and retreat to lower elevations, but the Nightland beings weren't finished with their intervention. The hunting party found that all paths leading away from Clingman's Dome had been altered or eliminated. Familiar deer trails led in circles back to their starting point. Ridgelines that should have provided clear navigation routes disappeared into fog that existed only in specific locations, creating barriers that couldn't be crossed or circumnavigated. The psychological warfare escalated when the hunters began, encountering versions of themselves that claimed to be the real hunting party. These doppelgangers appeared at their campsites, using their equipment and speaking with their voices, but making statements and decisions that contradicted their actual intentions. The duplicate hunters insisted they were the original party and that Bell's group were the false copies, creating an identity crisis that shattered their confidence in their own reality. The surviving hunters escaped Clingman's Dome only after Bell performed a traditional Cherokee purification ceremony that his grandfather had taught him for dealing with spiritual contamination. The ritual involved burning specific plants while reciting protective chants that had been passed down through generations, specifically for encounters with nightland beings. According to Samuel's account, the ceremony worked by acknowledging the entity's authority over their domain while requesting safe passage rather than attempting to challenge their power. The 6 hunters who returned to the tribal community were forever changed by their experience. They aged rapidly over the following months, developing white hair and deep wrinkles that made them appear decades older than their actual ages. More disturbing was their shared affliction of temporal displacement. They would begin conversations about events that hadn't happened yet, describe hunting trips they planned to take in the past, and sometimes failed to recognize their own family members for hours at a time. The 3 hunters who disappeared on Clingman's Dome were never found, but Cherokee oral tradition maintains that they weren't killed by the nightland beings. They were absorbed into the mountain's spiritual ecosystem, becoming part of the supernatural landscape that guards the Forbidden Peak. Traditional accounts describe occasional sightings of these lost hunters over the following decades, appearing as warnings to other Cherokee who ventured too close to dangerous areas. Joseph Crow Feather's research has identified 17 peaks along the current Appalachian Trail that were considered forbidden territory by Cherokee traditional law. Modern incident reports from these locations show striking correlations with the historical accounts of nightland being encounters. Hikers in these areas report the same phenomena described in Cherokee oral tradition. Landscape changes that occur overnight, navigation equipment failures, encounters with duplicate versions of themselves, and the sensation of being observed by entities that exist just outside normal perception. Most disturbing is the pattern of missing persons cases in the Forbidden Peak areas. Unlike typical wilderness disappearances, these cases share characteristics that match Cherokee descriptions of nightland being interventions. The missing hikers vanish without leaving normal evidence of departure or struggle. Their abandoned gear is found arranged in patterns that suggest deliberate organization rather than random abandonment. Search and rescue operations in these areas are consistently hampered by navigation difficulties and equipment malfunctions that mirror the experiences described in traditional Cherokee accounts. The Cherokee warnings about forbidden peaks weren't primitive superstitions or cultural metaphors. They were practical survival information based on centuries of documented encounters with entities that maintain active territorial control over specific mountain locations. The traditional protocols for avoiding spiritual contamination, the ceremonial knowledge required for safe passage through dangerous areas, and the detailed maps of forbidden territories represent an ancient early warning system designed to protect human communities from supernatural threats that modern hikers encounter without any cultural preparation or protective knowledge. What makes the Cherokee warnings truly terrifying isn't their age or mystical origins. It's their continued relevance to modern experiences along the Appalachian Trail. The nightland beings haven't disappeared or become dormant with the passage of time. They continue to guard their territorial boundaries with the same intelligence and supernatural capabilities that Cherokee hunters documented centuries ago. Every hiker who ventures onto the Forbidden Peaks becomes a potential victim of entities that view human presence as an intrusion requiring correction, using methods that transcend the physical limitations of our reality. The question isn't whether we should respect ancient Cherokee warnings about forbidden territories. The question is whether we can survive continued exposure to supernatural entities that our culture has no traditional knowledge for understanding or appeasing. The Cherokee spent centuries learning to coexist with the nightland beings through careful avoidance and respectful acknowledgement of their authority. Modern hikers enter their domain as ignorant trespassers, unaware that they're walking through territories guarded by intelligences that consider human intrusion a violation, punishable by absorption into landscapes that exist outside the normal flow of time and space. Story number 6. The Lost Colony Connection. The disappearance of the Roanoke colony in 1590 remains one of America's most enduring mysteries, with 115 English settlers vanishing without explanation from their settlement on what is now the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Traditional theories focus on integration with local Native American tribes, starvation, or Spanish attacks, but recent archaeological discoveries along the Appalachian Trail suggest a far more disturbing possibility. The colonists didn't simply disappear. They were drawn inland by the same supernatural forces that continue to claim hikers in the mountains today, following ancient pathways that lead to locations where the normal rules of existence break down entirely. Dr. Amanda Reeves, a historical archaeologist from the University of Virginia, made the connection while investigating unexplained stone structures found along remote sections of the Appalachian Trail in western North Carolina. These constructions don't match any known Native American building techniques, nor do they correspond to documented European settlements from the colonial period. Instead, they represent a unique architectural style that combines English masonry methods with symbolic elements that appear nowhere else in the archaeological record of early American colonization. The breakthrough discovery occurred during a routine survey of a medieval-looking stone circle found approximately 40 miles inland from the original Roanoke settlement location. Carbon dating of organic materials embedded in the mortar placed the construction between 1587 and 1592, exactly coinciding with the period when the lost colony vanished from recorded history. More significantly, carved into the stones were symbols that matched markings found at the abandoned Roanoke site, including the cryptic word Croatoan, that represented the only clue left by the disappeared colonists. Dr. Reeves's team discovered that the stone circle wasn't an isolated structure, but part of a larger network of similar constructions, stretching along what would eventually become the Appalachian Trail corridor. Using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery analysis, they identified 17 separate stone sites arranged in a precise geometric pattern that spans over 200 miles of mountain terrain. The mathematical precision of the placement suggests sophisticated planning and coordination that would have required extensive knowledge of the regional geography and months of construction work by a substantial labor force. The stone sites contain evidence of extended habitation by people with European tools and agricultural techniques, but also show signs of rapid abandonment under circumstances that mirror the mysterious departure from Roanoke Island. Personal belongings were left behind in perfect preservation. Pewter dishes still arranged on stone tables, clothing stored in wooden chests, and tools positioned as if their owners had simply stepped away momentarily and never returned. Most disturbing are the journals and letters found sealed in waterproof containers, written in Elizabethan English and documenting experiences that challenge rational explanation. The most complete surviving document is a diary attributed to Eleanor Dare, the daughter of Roanoke Colony Governor John White and mother of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Eleanor's journal entries describe the colonists' inland journey following strange lights that appeared in the western mountains, calling to them with voices that spoke in perfect English but seemed to emanate from the landscape itself. The lights promised safety, abundant food and protection from the harsh coastal environment that had claimed so many lives during their first years in the New World. According to Eleanor's account, the journey inland became increasingly surreal as the colonists followed the mysterious lights deeper into the Appalachian foothills. Familiar landmarks disappeared overnight, replaced by valleys and ridgelines that didn't appear on any maps they carried. Streams flowed in directions that contradicted their compass readings. while game trails led them through terrain that seemed to shift and reconfigure when they weren't directly observing it. Most unsettling was the discovery that their own footprints from previous days were found ahead of them on paths they hadn't yet traveled, as if time itself was folding back on their journey. The colonists reported encounters with beings they described as angels of the wilderness, tall luminescent figures that appeared at twilight to guide them toward specific camping locations and water sources. These entities communicated without speaking, projecting thoughts and emotions directly into the colonists' minds with such clarity that many began to believe they were receiving divine guidance toward a promised land hidden in the western mountains. The beings demonstrated knowledge of English customs and Christian beliefs that seemed impossible for any earthly intelligence to possess, reinforcing the colonists' conviction that they were being led by supernatural messengers. Eleanor's journal. Entries become increasingly disjointed as the inland journey progresses, describing experiences that blur the line between spiritual revelation and psychological breakdown. She writes of finding English gardens growing wild in forest clearings, complete with roses and herbs that could only have been planted by European hands, but showing signs of cultivation that predated their arrival by decades. The colonists discovered stone foundations of buildings that matched architectural plans they carried for structures they had never built, as if their intended settlement had been constructed by unknown hands and then abandoned for their eventual arrival. The most disturbing entries describe the colonists' gradual realization that they were not alone in following the mysterious lights toward the mountain settlements. Eleanor writes of finding campsites that showed evidence of recent English occupation, complete with familiar personal belongings and cooking implements, but no signs of the people who had used them. Stranger still were the discoveries of graves, marked with English names and dates that hadn't occurred yet, suggesting that other groups of colonists had preceded them to this location and met unknown fates. The journal's final entries, dated in early 1591, describe the colonists' arrival at what Eleanor terms the final settlement, a valley hidden deep in the mountains where stone structures had been prepared for their occupation, complete with cleared farmland, fresh water sources, and storage facilities filled with preserved food. The settlement appeared to be a perfect refuge, offering everything the struggling Roanoke colony had lacked. But Eleanor's writing reveals growing unease about the supernatural perfection of their new home. She describes the settlement as existing in a state of perpetual twilight, where the sun never fully rose nor completely set, creating a timeless environment that made it impossible to track the passage of days or seasons. The colonists began to lose their sense of individual identity, finding themselves performing tasks they had no memory of starting and engaging in conversations they couldn't recall beginning. Most terrifying was the discovery that their reflection in the settlement's water sources showed them as they had been years earlier, suggesting that time moved differently in their mountain refuge. The journal ends abruptly with Eleanor's final entry describing the colonists' realization that they had become permanent residents of the mountain settlement, unable to leave despite their growing desire to return to the familiar world they had left behind. She writes of attempted departures that led them in circles back to the settlement, regardless of which direction they traveled or how carefully they navigated. The mountain landscape seemed to reshape itself to prevent their escape, creating an invisible prison that confined them to their supernatural refuge. Dr. Reeves's archaeological team found Eleanor Dare's remains in 2019, perfectly preserved in a stone chamber beneath the central settlement structure. Her body showed no signs of aging beyond her documented death date in 1591, despite over 4 centuries of burial in mountain soil that should have completely decomposed organic remains. More disturbing was the discovery that Eleanor's clothing and personal effects showed evidence of ongoing maintenance and repair, as if someone had been caring for her remains throughout the intervening centuries. The implications of the lost colony connection extend far beyond historical curiosity. Analysis of modern missing persons cases along the Appalachian Trail reveals striking parallels to the experiences described in Eleanor Dare's journal. Hikers report following mysterious lights toward hidden valleys, discovering evidence of previous visitors who left no traces in official records, and experiencing temporal distortions that make accurate navigation impossible. Most significantly, Several missing persons cases involve the discovery of abandoned campsites that contain modern equipment arranged in patterns that match the stone settlements built by the lost colony survivors. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the 17 lost colony stone sites have revealed extensive underground chamber systems that connect the surface structures in a vast network spanning hundreds of miles. These subterranean passages contain evidence of ongoing occupation, including fresh air circulation, maintained pathways, and storage areas that show signs of recent use. Most disturbing are the chambers that contain modern hiking equipment, camping gear, and personal belongings that match items reported missing in contemporary disappearance cases. The lost colony stone sites appear to be active collection points where the same supernatural forces that drew the Roanoke colonists inland continue to attract modern hikers toward hidden settlements that exist outside normal time and space. The beings that Eleanor Dare described as angels of the wilderness continue to guide lost travelers toward mountain refuges that promise safety and sustenance, but trap their residents in timeless environments that prevent return to the outside world. What makes the lost colony connection truly terrifying isn't the historical mystery of what happened to the disappeared colonists. It's the evidence that the same supernatural system continues to operate along the Appalachian Trail today. The mysterious lights, the guiding entities, the hidden settlements, and the temporal distortions that claim the Roanoke colonists represent an ongoing supernatural infrastructure that has been collecting human populations for over 4 centuries. Each missing hiker becomes part of a growing community of displaced individuals trapped in mountain settlements that exist parallel to our reality but remain forever separated from the world they left behind. The question isn't whether the lost colony solved the mystery of their disappearance by finding sanctuary in the Appalachian Mountains. The question is, how many modern hikers have joined Eleanor Dare and her fellow colonists in settlements that offer eternal refuge at the cost of eternal imprisonment, and whether the supernatural forces that collected the Roanoke colonists are expanding their operations to accommodate the growing number of people drawn to these ancient mountains in search of solitude and spiritual renewal. Story number 7. The Underground Network. Beneath the familiar trails and scenic overlooks of the Appalachian Mountains lies a vast network of caves and tunnels that doesn't appear on any geological survey or speleological map. These aren't natural limestone caverns carved by millennia of water erosion, nor are they abandoned mining operations from America's industrial past. Instead, they represent an artificial underground system that spans the entire length of the Appalachian Trail, connecting distant locations through passages that demonstrate engineering capabilities far beyond anything documented in the historical record of human habitation in these mountains. Dr. Marcus Thompson first discovered evidence of the network while conducting routine geological surveys for the National Park Service in Shenandoah National Park during the summer of 2020. As a professional cave mapper with over 20 years of experience documenting underground systems throughout the eastern United States, Thompson had developed sophisticated techniques for identifying hidden caverns using ground-penetrating radar and seismic analysis. What his equipment detected beneath Section Hiker's Paradise near Skyland Resort defied everything he understood about Appalachian geology. The initial reading suggested a hollow space approximately 40 feet below the trail surface, extending in a perfect straight line for over 3 miles through terrain that should have been solid bedrock. The dimensions indicated a tunnel large enough for human passage, but the acoustic properties suggested artificial construction rather than natural formation. Most puzzling was the complete absence of any historical documentation for excavation. Work in this area, despite the massive undertaking that creating such a tunnel would have required. Thompson obtained permission to conduct exploratory drilling, expecting to find evidence of forgotten mining operations or perhaps undocumented Civil War fortifications. Instead, his core samples revealed something that challenged his understanding of the geological timeline in this region. The tunnel walls appeared to be lined with a material that resembled concrete but contained mineral compositions that didn't match any known construction techniques. Carbon dating of organic materials embedded in the lining produced results that predated European colonization by centuries, suggesting the tunnels were constructed long before any documented human engineering projects in the Appalachians. But the breakthrough came when Thompson's drilling equipment broke through into the tunnel space, immediately detecting air circulation that indicated the passage was part of a much larger ventilation system. When he lowered fiber optic cameras into the opening, the footage revealed a construction marvel that shouldn't exist beneath the Appalachian wilderness. The tunnel extended beyond the range of his lighting equipment in both directions, featuring perfectly smooth walls, a level floor, and architectural details that suggested sophisticated planning and execution. Most disturbing was the evidence of recent use. The tunnel floor showed clear pathways worn by repeated foot traffic, and the walls contained mounting brackets for torches or lighting systems that had been maintained within recent decades. Thompson's cameras detected side passages branching off from the main tunnel at regular intervals, creating a network of intersecting corridors that implied a vast underground infrastructure hidden beneath the seemingly pristine wilderness of the national park. Thompson's initial exploration of the tunnel system revealed artifacts that shouldn't exist in this location or time period. Stone carvings along the walls depicted symbols that resembled a mixture of Native American petroglyphs and European architectural ornaments, but arranged in patterns that suggested a cultural fusion that had no historical precedent in this region. More unsettling were the tool marks on the tunnel walls, showing evidence of cutting implements that left patterns unlike anything produced by known mining or excavation equipment. The tunnel system extended far beyond Thompson's initial discovery site. Using remote sensing equipment, his team mapped an underground network that connected locations across multiple states, following the approximate route of the Appalachian Trail with remarkable precision. The tunnels appeared to provide subterranean access to every major wilderness area along the trail corridor, creating a hidden transportation system that could allow undetected movement across hundreds of miles of supposedly pristine wilderness. What transformed Thompson's archaeological curiosity into genuine fear was the discovery that the tunnel system wasn't abandoned. Motion sensors placed at the initial entry point detected regular movement within the passages, following patterns that suggested organized activity rather than random wildlife intrusion. The creatures or individuals using the tunnels moved during specific time periods, primarily during the hours between midnight and dawn, and their movement patterns indicated familiarity with the underground geography that suggested long-term habitation. Temperature monitoring revealed that the tunnels maintained a constant climate that differed from the natural underground temperature of the surrounding bedrock. The artificial atmosphere suggested active environmental controls, implying that whatever forces had constructed, the network continued to maintain its operational systems. Most disturbing was the discovery of air circulation patterns that indicated the tunnel system connected to surface openings in remote locations that Thompson's team couldn't access or identify using conventional mapping techniques. The acoustic properties of the tunnel system provided the most terrifying evidence of ongoing occupation. Sensitive recording equipment detected sounds that resembled human conversation, but the voices spoke in languages that linguists couldn't identify or classify. The conversations occurred at regular intervals, suggesting scheduled meetings or organized activities taking place deep beneath the hiking trails where thousands of people walked each year, completely unaware of the hidden civilization operating below their feet. Thompson's team documented evidence of tunnel entrances at 17 different locations along the Appalachian Trail, hidden beneath rock formations, concealed behind vegetation, or camouflaged using construction techniques that made them invisible to casual observation. Each entrance showed signs of regular use, with well-maintained access paths and concealment systems that indicated sophisticated security measures designed to prevent discovery by surface travelers. The underground network appeared to serve multiple functions beyond simple transportation. Thompson's explorations revealed chamber systems that resembled underground cities, complete with carved living spaces, storage areas, and what appeared to be ceremonial or meeting halls. The chambers contained evidence of long-term habitation, including furniture carved from stone, water collection and distribution systems, and waste disposal methods that demonstrated advanced understanding of underground engineering principles. Most disturbing were the chambers that showed evidence of surface surveillance operations. These rooms contained observation equipment, communication devices, and documentation systems that appeared to be monitoring activity along the surface trail network. The equipment was too sophisticated to be abandoned historical artifacts, suggesting that whoever operated the underground system maintained active surveillance of hiking activity throughout the Appalachian corridor. The surveillance evidence included detailed maps of the surface trail system with notations in unknown languages, photographic documentation of individual hikers, and what appeared to be behavioral analysis charts tracking human movement patterns and camping preferences. The level of detail suggested that the underground operators had been systematically studying surface hiking activity for extended periods, compiling information that could be used to predict and potentially influence human behavior in the wilderness. Areas above their hidden domain. Thompson's most chilling discovery involved chambers that contained personal belongings from missing hikers spanning several decades. The items were carefully cataloged and preserved, arranged in collections that suggested systematic acquisition rather than random scavenging. Each collection appeared to represent a complete inventory of an individual hiker's equipment, clothing, and personal effects, stored with museum-quality care in underground archives that chronicled decades of disappearances along the Appalachian Trail. The underground operators had apparently been collecting more than just equipment. Several chambers contained detailed journals written by missing hikers, documenting their experiences during extended periods of underground captivity. The accounts described forced participation in underground communities, assignment to specific work duties within the tunnel system, and gradual indoctrination into whatever culture or society operated beneath the mountain wilderness. These captive narratives revealed that the underground network served as more than a hidden transportation system. It functioned as a parallel civilization that existed entirely separate from surface society. The captive hikers described structured communities with defined social hierarchies, specialized work assignments, and cultural practices that blended elements from multiple historical periods and geographical regions. Most disturbing was their gradual acceptance of underground life, with later journal entries showing decreased interest in returning to the surface world they had left behind. The psychological conditioning described in the captive journals followed consistent patterns that suggested systematic indoctrination techniques. New arrivals were initially confined to isolated chambers while undergoing what the underground operators termed surface detoxification, a process that apparently involved sensory deprivation, controlled nutrition, and exposure to environmental conditions that gradually altered their psychological attachment to surface life. Thompson's research team faced escalating security challenges as their investigation of the underground network progressed. Equipment failures became frequent and appeared to be deliberately caused rather than accidental. Surveillance cameras positioned near tunnel entrances were systematically disabled or redirected, while GPS devices and communication equipment experienced interference that prevented accurate location tracking or contact with surface support teams. The most direct evidence of underground operator awareness came when Thompson discovered that his research activities were being monitored and documented by the same surveillance systems he had found in the underground chambers. His team's movement patterns, equipment locations, and investigation schedule had been systematically recorded and analyzed, suggesting that the underground operators viewed surface researchers as subjects for study rather than threats to be avoided. The underground network represents something far more threatening than simple hidden cave systems or forgotten historical tunnels. The evidence suggests an organized underground society that has been operating parallel to surface civilization for centuries, maintaining sophisticated infrastructure and surveillance capabilities while systematically collecting surface dwellers for purposes that remain hidden in the depths of their artificial mountain domain. What makes the underground network truly terrifying isn't just its vast scope or hidden presence beneath America's most popular hiking trail. It's the evidence that its operators have been studying surface human behavior with the patience and methodology of scientists conducting long-term research on an alien species. Every hiker who walks the Appalachian Trail unknowingly moves above a hidden civilization that monitors their activity, documents their behavior, and occasionally selects individuals for inclusion in underground communities that exist entirely outside the awareness of the surface world. The question isn't whether vast tunnel systems exist beneath the Appalachian Trail, connecting remote wilderness areas through hidden passages that have operated for centuries without detection. The question is what the underground operators are planning to do with the information they've gathered about surface human behavior, and whether their patient observation phase is transitioning into more active intervention in the lives of those who venture into their mountain domain seeking solitude and natural beauty, unaware that every step they take is monitored by intelligences that view them as subjects worthy of collection and study. Story number 8. The Watchers in the Windows. Scattered throughout the remote wilderness sections of the Appalachian Trail stand dozens of abandoned cabins, their weathered walls and broken windows testifying to the hardy mountain folk who once carved lives from these unforgiving slopes. Most hikers assume these structures are simple relics of Appalachian history, empty shells left behind when families moved to easier lives in modern towns and cities. But careful observation reveals a disturbing truth about these seemingly vacant buildings. They aren't as abandoned as they appear. Someone or something continues to maintain them, and that presence watches from darkened windows as modern hikers pass by, unaware they're being observed by entities that have claimed these forgotten homesteads as surveillance posts. Rachel Martinez discovered the truth about the watching windows during a solo section hike through the remote wilderness areas of Western Virginia in October 2021. As a professional photographer specializing in abandoned architecture, she had specifically sought out these mountain cabins to document the slow decay of Appalachian heritage buildings. Her artistic eye was trained to notice details that casual hikers missed: subtle signs of maintenance, evidence of recent occupancy, and most importantly, the difference between truly empty buildings and structures that only appeared vacant. The first cabin Rachel photographed stood in a clearing approximately 2 miles off the main trail, accessible only through an overgrown logging road that required careful navigation to avoid getting lost in the dense mountain forest. The structure appeared to be a typical early 20th century mountain homestead with hand-hewn log walls, a stone chimney, and windows that had lost their glass decades ago. Rachel's initial photographs captured what seemed to be a standard example of rural abandonment, a building slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness that surrounded it. However, when Rachel reviewed her images that evening, she noticed something that made her question her initial assessment of the cabin's vacancy. In several photographs taken from different angles, the dark window openings showed subtle variations in shadow depth and texture that suggested movement within the building during her visit. Most unsettling was a series of images that appeared to capture a pale shape positioned behind one of the windows, barely visible but consistently present across multiple photographs taken over a 15-minute period. Intrigued by the possibility of documenting genuine paranormal activity, Rachel returned to the same cabin the following day with additional camera equipment and motion sensors. Her daylight examination of the building revealed details that contradicted the appearance of long-term abandonment. The wooden floors inside showed clear pathways worn by regular foot traffic, and the stone fireplace contained ashes that couldn't be more than a few days old. Most disturbing was the discovery that the cabin's interior had been systematically cleaned and organized, with furniture arranged in functional living patterns rather than the random decay expected in truly abandoned structures. Rachel's motion sensors detected activity within the cabin during the late afternoon hours, recording movement patterns that suggested a single occupant following established routines. The sensors tracked consistent activity in specific areas of the building: the main room, the kitchen area, and what appeared to be a sleeping space in the cabin's loft. The movement patterns were too organized and purposeful to be attributed to wildlife intrusion, indicating human or human-like presence, maintaining regular habitation of the supposedly empty building. The breakthrough in understanding came when Rachel positioned remote cameras inside the cabin overnight, hoping to capture evidence of whatever entity was maintaining the building. The footage revealed something that transformed her artistic documentation project into a terrifying encounter with intelligence that defied rational explanation. The cameras recorded a figure moving through the cabin during the hours between midnight and dawn, but the entity appeared to exist partially outside normal visual perception. The recorded figure seemed to shift between visible and invisible states, sometimes appearing as a clearly defined human silhouette and other times existing as nothing more than disturbances in air density that created subtle visual distortions. Most unsettling was the entity's apparent awareness of the recording equipment. It consistently positioned itself at angles that prevented clear photographic documentation while demonstrating obvious knowledge of camera placement and field of view limitations. Rachel's analysis of the overnight footage revealed that the entity followed precise routines that suggested long-term habitation and territorial familiarity. It moved through the cabin, performing what appeared to be maintenance activities, adjusting furniture positions, tending to the fireplace, and organizing stored materials according to systems that implied permanent residence. The activities weren't random supernatural manifestations, but purposeful domestic behaviors that indicated the entity considered the cabin its active home, rather than a temporary shelter. Most disturbing was the entity's response to Rachel's presence, an investigation. The cameras captured it, examining her equipment with obvious intelligence, manipulating her motion sensors and photographic devices in ways that suggested technical understanding. The entity appeared to be studying her documentation methods, learning about her equipment capabilities, and potentially adapting its behavior to avoid future detection. Rachel expanded her investigation to other abandoned cabins in the area, discovering that the phenomenon wasn't isolated to a single building. Using her professional photography equipment and newly developed detection techniques, she documented evidence of similar occupancy in 17 different structures across a 50-mile section of the Appalachian Trail corridor. Each cabin showed the same patterns: apparent abandonment that masked ongoing habitation by entities that maintained the buildings while avoiding detection by casual observers. The entities occupying these mountain cabins demonstrated coordination and communication that suggested organized activity rather than random supernatural manifestations. Rachel's surveillance revealed that the beings moved between different cabins following schedules that indicated territorial assignments and shared responsibilities. Some entities appeared to specialize in specific maintenance activities, while others seemed focused on surveillance of trail activity and human behavior in their assigned areas. The surveillance function became apparent when Rachel discovered that her own movements along the trail were being systematically monitored and documented by the cabin entities. She found evidence of observation posts positioned near established camping areas with sight lines that provided comprehensive coverage of human activity throughout the wilderness corridor. The entities had created a surveillance network that allowed them to track and study every hiker who passed through their territorial range. Rachel's most chilling discovery involved the entity's apparent collection and study of human artifacts. Several cabins contained carefully organized collections of items that belonged to hikers who had passed through the area: clothing, equipment, personal belongings, and camping gear, arranged in displays that suggested systematic analysis of human technology and behavior. The collections weren't random theft, but selective acquisition focused on items that provided information about human capabilities and survival techniques. The psychological impact of prolonged observation by the cabin entities became apparent when Rachel began experiencing the sensation of constant surveillance during her wilderness photography expeditions. She found herself unable to focus on her artistic work, distracted by the persistent feeling that intelligent eyes were watching her every movement from the darkened windows of abandoned buildings. The sensation intensified when she approached any cabin or homestead, creating anxiety responses that suggested her subconscious mind was detecting threat signals her rational thoughts couldn't identify. Rachel's documentation efforts attracted unwanted attention from the entities she was studying. Her camera equipment began experiencing systematic failures that appeared deliberately caused rather than accidental. Photographs of cabin interiors consistently showed overexposure or lens artifacts that prevented clear documentation of evidence, while motion sensors and recording devices experienced interference that suggested active countermeasures against her surveillance attempts. The entity's defensive responses escalated when Rachel attempted to enter cabins where she had documented clear evidence of ongoing habitation. She found that doorways and windows that appeared easily accessible during daylight reconnaissance became impossible to enter during her nighttime investigation attempts. The buildings seemed to seal themselves against intrusion, creating barriers that prevented access while maintaining the appearance of normal abandoned structures. Most terrifying was Rachel's discovery that the entities had begun visiting her own campsite during overnight stays in the wilderness areas they controlled. Motion sensors around her tent detected approach patterns that matched the movement signatures she had recorded at the occupied cabins. The entities appeared to be conducting counter-surveillance, studying her equipment and behavior with the same methodical attention she had been directing toward their hidden activities. Rachel's final encounter with the cabin entities occurred when she attempted to photograph the interior of a particularly well-maintained homestead that showed extensive evidence of recent habitation. As she positioned her camera equipment near the main window, she became aware of a presence watching her from inside the building. The entity positioned itself directly behind the window opening, creating a confrontation that allowed her to observe its nature for the first time without photographic intermediation. What Rachel saw challenged her understanding of the boundary between human and supernatural intelligence. The entity appeared fundamentally human in basic structure, but wrong in ways that suggested either severe physical alteration or origins outside normal human development. Its proportions were subtly incorrect, with limbs that seemed too long and joints that moved with flexibility that exceeded normal human range of motion. Most disturbing were its eyes, which reflected available light with an intensity that indicated biological adaptations for improved night vision. The entity's behavior during their direct encounter suggested intelligence and curiosity rather than hostility or territorial aggression. It examined Rachel with obvious interest, tilting its head and adjusting its position to maintain optimal observation angles as she moved around the cabin exterior. The interaction felt like a mutual study session, with both parties documenting each other's appearance and behavior for later analysis. Rachel terminated her investigation following this direct encounter, recognizing that her documentation activities had crossed from research into active engagement with entities that possessed both the intelligence and capability to respond to her presence in ways that could compromise her safety. Her final photographs of the cabin window showed the entity maintaining its observation position, watching her departure with the patient attention of a sentinel that understood her retreat represented only a temporary withdrawal rather than permanent abandonment of its territory. The watchers in the windows represent something far more complex than simple supernatural residents of abandoned buildings. They demonstrate organized territorial behavior, systematic surveillance capabilities, and adaptive responses to human intrusion that suggest coordinated intelligence operating throughout the Appalachian wilderness. Their presence in seemingly abandoned cabins creates a hidden observation network that monitors and studies human activity along America's most popular hiking trail. What makes the watchers truly terrifying isn't their occupation of forgotten homesteads or their surveillance of hiking activity. It's their demonstrated ability to maintain organized operations while remaining virtually undetectable to the thousands of people who pass through their territory each year. They represent a parallel intelligence that has established permanent residence in the spaces abandoned by human civilization, creating hidden communities that study surface human behavior while maintaining perfect concealment in plain sight. The question isn't whether entities occupy the abandoned cabins that dot the Appalachian wilderness, watching modern hikers from darkened windows while maintaining their forgotten homesteads with supernatural care. The question is what they've learned from decades of patient observation, and whether their careful study of human behavior is preparation for more direct interaction with the surface world they monitor so systematically from their hidden mountain refuges. Story number 9. The Disappearing Trail. Markers, the white blazes that mark the Appalachian Trail, represent more than simple navigation aids. They're lifelines that guide millions of hikers safely through 2,000 miles of wilderness from Georgia to Maine. These distinctive 2-inch by 6-inch white paint marks appear every 50 to 100 feet along the trail, painted on trees and rocks by volunteer maintainers who understand that consistent marking can mean the difference between a successful hike in a deadly emergency. But in certain sections of the trail, something is systematically removing these crucial markers, creating zones of navigational chaos where experienced hikers become hopelessly lost, despite following paths they've traveled for years. Trail maintainer David Kim first noticed the pattern during routine maintenance work in the remote wilderness sections of North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest in spring 2022. As a volunteer with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, Kim was responsible for maintaining trail markers across a 20-mile section that included some of the most challenging terrain along the entire trail corridor. His work involved repainting faded blazes, clearing vegetation that obscured markers, and adding new blazes where trail reroutes required updated navigation guidance. Kim discovered that blazes he had painted during his previous maintenance cycle 6 months earlier had completely disappeared from trees that showed no evidence of natural wear or weather damage. The missing markers weren't simply faded or partially obscured, they had been removed so thoroughly that the underlying bark showed no trace of paint residue or chemical staining. Most puzzling was the precision of the removal process, which had eliminated the paint without damaging the tree surfaces or leaving tool marks that would indicate mechanical scraping. Initially, attributing the missing blazes to vandalism or unauthorized trail modifications, Kim began documenting the locations and patterns of marker disappearances. His records revealed something that transformed routine maintenance concerns into evidence of systematic sabotage targeting the trail's navigation infrastructure. The missing blazes followed specific patterns that seemed designed to create maximum confusion for hikers while maintaining enough markers to prevent immediate awareness of navigational compromise. The removal pattern concentrated on blazes positioned at critical decision points where hikers needed clear directional guidance, trail intersections, stream crossings, and areas where the main trail diverged from side paths or logging roads. Someone or something was selectively targeting the most crucial navigation markers while leaving less important blazes intact, creating a subtle form of misdirection that would cause hikers to make wrong turns without realizing they had left the correct trail. Kim's investigation revealed that the blaze removals occurred overnight during specific time periods when no hikers were documented as camping in the affected areas. Security cameras positioned near known disappearance sites detected no human activity during the hours when markers vanished, suggesting that whatever was removing the blazes operated with stealth capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. Most disturbing was the discovery that the removals followed complex schedules that seemed coordinated across multiple trail sections spanning different national forests. The psychological impact on lost hikers became apparent when Kim interviewed people who had become disoriented in areas where blazes had been systematically removed. Their accounts described a consistent pattern of gradual confusion that began with uncertainty about their location and escalated into complete navigational breakdown. Hikers reported following what they believed to be the main trail for hours before realizing they had been following unmarked paths that led deep into wilderness areas where rescue operations would be extremely difficult. Most unsettling were reports from experienced hikers who claimed to have seen white blazes that led them off the correct trail, only to discover later that no official markers existed in those locations. These false blazes appeared to be painted with materials that matched the official trail marking specifications, but guided hikers toward remote areas where they became increasingly lost and disoriented. The phantom markers seemed to appear when hikers were most vulnerable to misdirection and disappeared when rescue teams attempted to verify their locations. Kim's research attracted the attention of Dr. Sarah Chen, a behavioral psychologist who had been studying the psychological effects of navigational uncertainty on wilderness travelers. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the blaze removal pattern followed sophisticated principles of cognitive manipulation, creating navigational confusion that triggered specific psychological responses in lost hikers. The missing markers weren't randomly distributed, but strategically positioned to exploit known weaknesses in human spatial reasoning and decision-making under stress. According to Dr. Chen's research, the systematic removal of trail blazes created a form of environmental gaslighting that undermined hikers' confidence in their navigation abilities and spatial awareness. Lost hikers began to question their own memories of trail conditions, their ability to read maps and compasses, and their fundamental understanding of wilderness navigation. This psychological destabilization made them more susceptible to poor decision-making and increased their likelihood of becoming severely lost in areas where rescue operations faced significant challenges. The pattern of blaze disappearances correlated with increased missing persons cases in the affected trail sections. Analysis of search and rescue data revealed that hikers disappeared most frequently in areas where marker removal had been documented within the previous 30 days. The missing persons weren't random victims, but appeared to be specifically targeted individuals who met certain criteria related to their hiking experience, equipment capabilities, and solo travel status. Kim's investigation took a disturbing turn when he discovered evidence that the blaze removal process involved more than simple paint elimination. Trees that had lost their white markers showed biological changes that suggested exposure to substances or processes that shouldn't exist in natural forest environments. Bark analysis revealed chemical alterations that went beyond surface paint removal, indicating that whatever was eliminating the blazes was also modifying the underlying tree biology in ways that prevented future marker adhesion. The chemical analysis attracted attention from Dr. Michael Torres, a biochemist specializing in environmental contamination studies. Dr. Torres' examination of affected trees revealed the presence of organic compounds that didn't match any known natural or industrial chemicals. The substances appeared to be designed specifically to neutralize paint adhesion while promoting rapid healing of bark surfaces, suggesting technology or biological processes that exceeded current human capabilities. Most disturbing was Dr. Torres' discovery that the chemical compounds continued to affect trees for months after initial exposure, creating zones where new trailblazes couldn't be effectively applied. Volunteer maintainers found that fresh paint applied to previously affected trees would fade or disappear within days, regardless of weather conditions or paint quality. The affected areas were gradually expanding, creating growing sections of trail where permanent marking became impossible to maintain. Kim's surveillance efforts to identify the source of blaze removal yielded evidence that challenged rational explanation. Motion-activated cameras positioned near vulnerable markers detected activity during the hours when blazes disappeared, but the recorded footage showed environmental disturbances rather than identifiable agents of removal. Trees appeared to shed their paint marks spontaneously, as if the blazes were being absorbed into the bark or dissolved by unknown natural processes. The recorded footage revealed that blaze removal occurred in conjunction with other environmental anomalies that suggested supernatural intervention in forest ecosystems. Wildlife behavior changed dramatically during removal events, with nocturnal animals fleeing the area and diurnal species remaining inactive despite normal activity periods. Temperature fluctuations created localized weather patterns that didn't match regional conditions, while electromagnetic interference affected electronic equipment positioned near affected trees. Park Service investigators found evidence that the blaze removal problem extended far beyond Kim's maintenance area. Similar reports of systematic marker disappearance came from trail sections in Virginia, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Maine, suggesting a coordinated phenomenon affecting the entire Appalachian Trail corridor. The removals followed seasonal patterns that correlated with peak hiking periods, concentrating during times when the maximum number of people would be affected by navigational disruption. The scope of the phenomenon suggested organization and planning that exceeded the capabilities of human vandalism or environmental activism. The blaze removals required detailed knowledge of trail maintenance schedules, hiker traffic patterns, and wilderness rescue capabilities. Most significantly, the removal process operated across multiple jurisdictions and federal land management agencies without detection by law enforcement or environmental monitoring systems. Kim's final discovery revealed the true purpose behind the systematic blaze removal campaign. Hidden cameras positioned in areas where false blazes had been reported captured footage of hikers being guided towards specific locations by phantom markers that appeared and disappeared according to individual vulnerability factors. The false blazes seemed to target particular types of hikers: solo travelers, inexperienced navigators, and people hiking during optimal conditions for becoming permanently lost. The footage showed that hikers who followed false blazes were led through increasingly remote terrain toward areas where official trail markers had been systematically eliminated, creating navigational dead zones where rescue operations would face maximum difficulty. The false marker system appeared designed to collect specific types of hikers, while maintaining plausible deniability about the supernatural nature of their disappearance. The disappearing trail markers represent something far more sinister than environmental vandalism or natural marker degradation. They demonstrate organized intervention in the Appalachian Trail's navigation infrastructure designed to create controlled opportunities for hiker disappearance while maintaining the appearance of natural or accidental circumstances. The systematic nature of the removals, combined with the appearance of false markers that guide vulnerable hikers toward dangerous areas, suggests intelligent planning and execution by entities that understand human navigation psychology and wilderness rescue limitations. What makes the disappearing blazes truly terrifying isn't just the navigational chaos they create for individual hikers, it's the evidence that something is actively manipulating the trail's safety infrastructure to facilitate the collection of human travelers, according to criteria that remain hidden behind the phantom markers and vanishing blazes. The Appalachian Trail's white blazes represent trust between hikers and the wilderness, a promise that following the markers will lead to safety and successful completion of the journey. When that trust is systematically violated by intelligent forces that use our own navigation systems against us, every white blaze becomes a potential trap rather than a beacon of security. The question isn't whether trail blazes are disappearing from critical navigation points along the Appalachian Trail, replaced by false markers that guide hikers toward areas where rescue becomes impossible. The question is what happens to the people who follow those phantom blazes into the growing navigational dead zones, and whether the systematic elimination of trail markers is preparation for a larger campaign to transform America's most famous hiking trail into a collection system for entities that understand our vulnerabilities better than we understand their intentions. Story number 10. The emergency call cell phone coverage along the Appalachian Trail is notoriously unreliable, with vast sections of wilderness where modern communication technology simply cannot function due to mountainous terrain and the absence of cellular towers. Emergency responders know these dead zones intimately, understanding that hikers who become lost or injured in remote areas often cannot call for help until they reach established communication points near roads or populated areas. This makes the 911 calls that emergency dispatchers have been receiving from impossible locations all the more disturbing. Distress calls originating from areas where no cellular signal should exist, made by hikers who are often found to be missing when rescue teams arrive at the reported coordinates. Dispatcher Jennifer Walsh first encountered the phenomenon during a routine night shift at the Shenandoah County Emergency Communications Center in November 2020. With over 15 years of experience handling wilderness emergency calls, Walsh was familiar with the technical challenges of communication in remote mountain areas and had developed expertise in coordinating rescue operations using minimal location information from distressed hikers. What she received at 3:17 a.m. that night challenged everything she understood about cellular communication capabilities in the Appalachian wilderness. The call came through as a standard 911 emergency with GPS coordinates that placed the caller approximately 8 miles into Shenandoah National Park, in an area known for complete cellular dead zones where emergency calls were impossible according to all telecommunications mapping data. The caller identified himself as Marcus Chen, a solo hiker who reported being lost and disoriented after following trail markers that had led him into unfamiliar terrain. His voice was clear and the connection stable, suggesting strong cellular signal strength that shouldn't exist at his reported location. Walsh immediately dispatched search and rescue teams to the GPS coordinates while maintaining contact with Chen to gather additional information about his condition and surroundings. During their 23-minute conversation, Chen described landscape features that didn't match topographical maps of his supposed location, including a stone bridge over a deep ravine that appeared on no official surveys of the area. Most puzzling was his report of seeing lights from buildings in the distance, suggesting human habitation in wilderness areas that contained no documented structures. The search and rescue team reached Chen's reported coordinates within 2 hours, but found no trace of the missing hiker or evidence of recent human presence in the area. The GPS location corresponded to a steep slope covered in dense undergrowth where hiking would be virtually impossible, and the stone bridge Chen had described simply didn't exist. More disturbing was the complete absence of cellular signal at the location. Rescue team communication equipment couldn't establish contact with dispatch, confirming that the area remained a dead zone where emergency calls should be impossible. Walsh's investigation of the Chen incident revealed it wasn't an isolated occurrence. Emergency communication records showed a pattern of impossible calls from cellular dead zones throughout the Appalachian Trail corridor, with reports dating back over 5 years. These calls shared common characteristics that distinguished them from technical glitches or false emergency reports. They provided accurate GPS coordinates, described specific emergency situations, and maintained clear communication quality that suggested strong signal strength despite originating from areas where cellular coverage didn't exist. The impossible emergency calls followed predictable patterns that suggested systematic rather than random occurrence. They originated most frequently during overnight hours when hiking activity should be minimal, concentrated in wilderness areas with the most challenging rescue access, and involved callers who reported being lost despite claiming extensive hiking experience and proper navigation equipment. Most significantly, the callers consistently described terrain features and landmarks that didn't correspond to their reported GPS locations, as if they were calling from parallel versions of familiar landscapes. Dr. Amanda Rivera, a telecommunications engineer specializing in emergency communication systems, became involved when Walsh's department requested technical analysis of the impossible call phenomenon. Dr. Rivera's investigation revealed that the emergency calls exhibited signal characteristics that violated known principles of cellular communication technology. The calls showed signal strength and clarity that would require cellular towers positioned within the dead zones themselves, but no such infrastructure existed in the reported locations. According to Dr. Rivera's analysis, the emergency calls appeared to originate from communication equipment that operated outside normal cellular networks while maintaining compatibility with standard emergency dispatch systems. The signal patterns suggested access to satellite communication capabilities that exceeded anything available to civilian hiking equipment, implying technology that shouldn't be accessible to typical trail users. Most puzzling was evidence that the calls were being routed through communication infrastructure that didn't appear in any telecommunications database or network mapping system. The psychological profiles of emergency callers revealed disturbing consistencies that suggested the impossible calls weren't random technical anomalies but targeted communications from specific types of hikers. The callers were predominantly solo travelers with extensive wilderness experience who had been hiking in remote areas for multiple days before their emergency situations developed. They reported similar patterns of disorientation and navigation, failure despite carrying proper equipment, and following established safety protocols. Walsh's analysis of caller behavior during emergency conversations revealed that many hikers seemed confused about their own identity and recent activities. Callers frequently corrected themselves about basic information like their names, ages, and hiking experience, as if accessing memories that didn't quite match their current understanding of themselves. Most disturbing were calls where hikers described traveling with companions who weren't present when rescue teams reached their reported locations, suggesting memory alterations or experiences that existed outside normal reality. The content of emergency calls became increasingly surreal. As Walsh documented more cases, callers reported environmental conditions that couldn't exist in the natural world, streams that flowed uphill, trees that grew in perfect geometric patterns, and weather systems that affected only small areas while leaving surrounding regions untouched. The hikers described these impossible phenomena matter-of-factly, as if supernatural environmental conditions were normal aspects of their hiking experience. Most chilling were the emergency calls that continued after hikers had been officially declared missing. Search and rescue operations would conclude after failing to locate reported callers, but emergency dispatchers continued receiving calls from the same individuals weeks or months later. These follow-up calls came from the same impossible locations, with GPS coordinates that placed the callers in areas that had been thoroughly searched multiple times without finding any evidence of human presence. The follow-up calls revealed that missing hikers were experiencing extended survival situations that defied normal wilderness survival parameters. Callers reported being lost for weeks or months while maintaining adequate food, water, and shelter in areas where such resources shouldn't be available. They described finding prepared campsites, cache supplies, and even temporary structures that appeared when needed but couldn't be located by search teams investigating their reported coordinates. Dr. Rivera's technical investigation revealed that some emergency calls were being received simultaneously by multiple emergency dispatch centers across different states, with identical GPS coordinates and caller information being reported to rescue services in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania at the same time. The simultaneous calls suggested that individual hikers were somehow present in multiple locations simultaneously, or that their emergency signals were being broadcast across vast geographic areas through unknown communication methods. The most disturbing discovery involved emergency calls that provided advance warning of hiking emergencies before they occurred. Dispatchers received detailed reports of injuries, equipment failures, and dangerous weather conditions hours or days before. Other hikers in the same areas experienced identical problems. The predictive calls seemed to provide templates for future emergencies, as if someone or something was documenting wilderness dangers before they manifested in reality. Walsh's investigation attracted attention from federal agencies when she discovered that some impossible emergency calls contained information about classified military activities and restricted airspace operations in remote mountain areas. Callers described observing aircraft, personnel, and equipment that shouldn't exist in civilian wilderness areas, suggesting that the communication phenomenon was intercepting or accessing restricted information through unknown surveillance capabilities. The federal investigation revealed that impossible emergency calls correlated with missing persons cases in ways that suggested the communication phenomenon was connected to hiker disappearances rather than simply documenting them. Areas where impossible calls originated most frequently showed the highest rates of unexplained missing persons cases, while the content of emergency calls often provided the only evidence that missing hikers had reached specific wilderness locations before vanishing completely. The psychological impact on emergency dispatchers became a significant concern as the impossible call phenomenon continued. Dispatchers reported experiencing stress and anxiety related to receiving emergency calls from people they couldn't help, knowing that rescue teams would find no evidence of the reported emergencies. The helplessness of receiving detailed distress calls from impossible locations created occupational trauma that affected emergency responders' ability to function effectively during normal rescue operations. Walsh's final analysis revealed that the impossible emergency calls represented more than technical anomalies or supernatural communication events. They appeared to be documentation of parallel emergency situations occurring in versions of the Appalachian wilderness that existed, adjacent to but separate from normal reality. The callers weren't necessarily lying about their locations and situations. They were experiencing genuine emergencies in landscape versions that rescue teams couldn't access through conventional means. The emergency calls from impossible locations represent something far more terrifying than communication equipment, malfunctions, or supernatural phenomenon. They provide evidence that hikers are being displaced into alternate versions of familiar wilderness areas where normal rescue operations cannot reach them. The clear communication quality and accurate GPS coordinates suggest that these parallel wilderness areas exist in close proximity to our normal reality, but remain inaccessible to conventional search and rescue methods. What makes the impossible emergency calls truly horrifying isn't just the technical impossibility of cellular communication from dead zones. It's the evidence that missing hikers continue to experience extended survival situations in parallel wilderness areas while emergency responders remain helpless to assist them. Every impossible call represents a person trapped in a version of the Appalachian Trail that exists adjacent to our familiar hiking routes, but separated by barriers that prevent rescue while allowing communication signals to cross between realities. The question isn't whether emergency dispatchers are receiving 911 calls from cellular dead zones where communication should be impossible, made by hikers who describe landscapes that don't match their reported GPS coordinates. The question is, how many missing persons along the Appalachian Trail have been displaced into parallel wilderness areas, where they continue to call for help from locations that exist beyond the reach of our rescue capabilities, and whether the impossible emergency calls represent evidence of a systematic collection process that traps hikers in alternate versions of familiar mountain landscapes, where survival becomes an eternal struggle rather than a temporary challenge. Story number 11. The Convergence Point. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where the ancient peaks reach toward skies that have witnessed millennia of human passage, lies a location that appears on no official maps but draws all the supernatural phenomena of these haunted trails toward its hidden coordinates. Local Cherokee traditions speak of it only in whispered warnings. Enivi-Galiahi, the place where all paths end. Modern investigators have come to call it the Convergence Point, a geographical nexus where every unexplained event, every mysterious disappearance, and every supernatural encounter along the entire Appalachian Trail ultimately traces back to a single mountain peak that seems to exist at the center of a web spanning 2,000 miles of wilderness. Dr. Elizabeth Santos first identified the Convergence Point through statistical analysis of incident reports gathered over 15 years of paranormal research along the Appalachian Trail. As a data scientist specializing in geographic pattern recognition, Dr. Santos had been contracted by various federal agencies to analyze the clustering of unexplained phenomena across national wilderness areas. Her assignment seemed routine. Identify environmental or geographical factors that might contribute to higher rates of hiking accidents and missing persons cases in specific trail sections. What Dr. Santos discovered through her analysis defied conventional understanding of random distribution and geographical influence on human behavior. Every category of supernatural phenomenon reported along the Appalachian Trail, from the Whistling Woman encounters to the Shadow People surveillance, from temporal anomalies to underground network access points, showed directional bias toward a specific set of coordinates in the remote wilderness of western North Carolina. The statistical probability of such convergence occurring through random chance was virtually zero, suggesting intelligent design behind the positioning of supernatural activity. The mathematical precision of the convergence pattern indicated that supernatural phenomena weren't randomly distributed along the trail, but strategically positioned to funnel human encounters toward the central coordinates. The Whistling Woman's territory formed the outermost detection network, identifying potential targets and guiding them toward areas where shadow people could conduct detailed surveillance. Time slip zones created temporal confusion that made hikers more susceptible to misdirection, while disappearing trailblazes eliminated reliable navigation options that might allow escape from the supernatural influence network. Dr. Santos's analysis revealed that the Convergence Point operated as a collection system spanning the entire Appalachian Trail, with each supernatural phenomenon serving a specific function in a coordinated process designed to identify, isolate, and ultimately transport selected individuals to the central location. The underground tunnel networks provided hidden transportation corridors, while the abandoned cabin surveillance posts monitored surface activity to optimize collection efficiency. Emergency calls from impossible locations served as tracking beacons, allowing coordination of supernatural activities across vast distances. The Cherokee oral traditions about Nvhi-Galiahi provided crucial context for understanding the Convergence Point's historical significance. According to tribal elder Joseph Crow Feather, the location had been forbidden territory for over 8 centuries, designated as a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds had been permanently compromised. Cherokee tradition described the peak as the site of an ancient catastrophe that had torn holes in reality itself, creating permanent gateways that allowed entities from other dimensions to establish operations in our world. The traditional accounts described Anvi Galiahi as a mountain that existed partially outside normal space and time, visible from certain angles but impossible to approach through conventional navigation. Cherokee hunting parties reported that the peak appeared to move position depending on the observer's location and intentions, maintaining consistent distance regardless of travel direction or duration. The mountain seemed to exist in a state of geographical flux that made it simultaneously present and absent from the physical landscape. Dr. Santos organized an expedition to locate and investigate the Convergence Point using the coordinates identified through her statistical analysis. The research team included specialists in geology, paranormal investigation, electromagnetic phenomena, and Cherokee cultural traditions. Their mission was to document the physical characteristics of the location and determine what geographical or geological features might account for its role as a supernatural focal point. The expedition faced immediate challenges that confirmed the unique nature of their destination. GPS equipment began providing contradictory readings as the team approached the calculated coordinates, with different devices showing their location in different states despite traveling together. Compassy readings became unreliable, spinning wildly or pointing toward directions that didn't correspond to magnetic north. Most disturbing was the discovery that their path toward the Convergence Point was being monitored by every type of supernatural entity they had previously documented along the Appalachian Trail. The Whistling Woman's song could be heard growing, stronger as they approached the coordinates, no longer attempting to lure individual hikers away from established trails, but serving as an audio beacon, guiding the research team toward their destination. Shadow people appeared in unprecedented numbers, abandoning their usual concealment techniques to maintain visible surveillance of the expedition's progress. The entities seemed to be announcing the team's approach rather than hiding from observation, as if their arrival at the Convergence Point was an anticipated event. The research team discovered that the Convergence Point existed in a state of environmental impossibility that violated multiple laws of physics simultaneously. The peak appeared to support ecosystems from different climatic zones at the same elevation, with tropical vegetation growing alongside Arctic plants in soil that maintained multiple temperature gradients within inches of each other. Water flowed uphill in some areas, while forming ice crystals in others, creating a landscape that resembled a laboratory experiment in environmental contradiction. Most significantly, the Convergence Point showed evidence of temporal instability that made linear time measurement impossible. The research team experienced different rates of time passage simultaneously, with some members aging hours while others experienced only minutes during the same activities. Their equipment recorded multiple timeline streams operating in parallel, suggesting that the location existed at the intersection of several temporal realities that influenced each other through unknown mechanisms. The archaeological evidence at the Convergence Point revealed a history of human presence spanning multiple civilizations and time periods that shouldn't coexist in the same location. Stone structures showed construction techniques from different eras arranged in chronological impossibility. Cherokee ceremonial sites built on Roman foundations, colonial-era buildings incorporating architectural elements that wouldn't be invented for centuries, and modern materials arranged in patterns that suggested future construction methodologies. The Lost Colony survivors' stone settlements formed the outer ring of the Convergence Point's human infrastructure, confirming Dr. Santos's theory that historical disappearances had been collected and transported to this location for centuries. The underground tunnel networks emerged from subterranean levels beneath the peak, creating transportation access that connected the Convergence Point to surveillance and collection sites across the entire Appalachian Trail system. The research team's most disturbing discovery involved evidence that the Convergence Point was preparing for a significant expansion of its operations. Construction activities using unknown technologies were creating new infrastructure designed to accommodate vastly increased human populations. The entities operating from the location appeared to be preparing for mass collection events that would transport thousands of people simultaneously rather than the small-scale individual disappearances that had characterized previous supernatural activity. The expansion preparations included communication arrays that could broadcast signals across the entire Appalachian Trail system, allowing coordinated supernatural activities spanning multiple states. The Cherokee Nightland beings operated from command centers that demonstrated technological capabilities far exceeding anything available to human civilization, suggesting that the supernatural entities had been developing advanced operational methods during their centuries of hidden residence at the Convergence Point. Dr. Santos's team documented evidence that every missing person along the Appalachian Trail had ultimately been transported to the Convergence Point, where they joined communities of displaced individuals spanning centuries of disappearances. The location operated as a collection center where people from different time periods and geographical origins were integrated into a hidden civilization that existed parallel to normal human society but remained invisible to outside observation. The psychological conditioning systems at the Convergence Point explained why missing persons rarely attempted to return to their original lives, even when opportunities arose. The entities operating the facility had developed sophisticated methods for altering human memory and identity, creating new personalities that felt more connected to the Convergence Point community than to the surface world they had left behind. The process wasn't forced imprisonment but voluntary recruitment through psychological manipulation that made collection targets eager to remain at their new location. The research team's investigation was terminated when they realized that their presence at the Convergence Point was serving the entity's expansion plans rather than documenting them for outside authorities. Their scientific equipment was being studied and reverse-engineered by intelligences that viewed human technology as primitive but useful for improving their own operational capabilities. Most terrifying was the discovery that their expedition had been anticipated and planned by the Convergence Point operators as a recruitment opportunity, rather than an investigative threat. Dr. Santos made the decision to evacuate her team when she realized that the Convergence Point's influence was already affecting their decision-making processes and emotional attachments to the location. Team members began expressing reluctance to leave, describing the location as more interesting and important than their previous research work. The psychological conditioning was subtle but effective, creating emotional bonds to the supernatural community that competed with their connections to the outside world. The research team's escape from the Convergence Point was complicated by the entity's apparent decision to allow their departure while ensuring they carried influence back to the surface world. The team members found themselves unable to accurately describe the location to outside authorities, experiencing memory gaps and communication difficulties that prevented effective reporting of their discoveries. The Convergence Point had allowed them to leave, while ensuring their knowledge remained contained and their influence neutralized. The Convergence Point represents the ultimate destination toward which all supernatural activity along the Appalachian Trail has been directed for centuries, a location where reality itself has been permanently altered to serve as headquarters for entities that view human civilization as a resource to be harvested rather than a society to be respected. Every supernatural phenomenon encountered by hikers serves the ultimate purpose of identifying and collecting individuals for transportation to this hidden facility where they join communities of displaced persons spanning multiple centuries and civilizations. What makes the Convergence Point truly terrifying isn't just its role as a collection center for missing persons or its violation of physical laws that make escape impossible. It's the evidence that the supernatural entities operating from this location are preparing for massive expansion of their collection activities. The infrastructure improvements, communication upgrades, and recruitment preparations suggest that the small-scale disappearances that have characterized supernatural activity along the Appalachian Trail are merely preliminary operations designed to perfect methods that will soon be applied on a much larger scale. The question isn't whether a hidden location exists at the center of all supernatural phenomena along the Appalachian Trail, serving as headquarters for entities that have been collecting human populations for centuries while remaining invisible to outside detection. The question is whether the Convergence Point's expansion preparations indicate that the supernatural collection system is transitioning from selective individual recruitment to mass population harvesting that will transform the Appalachian Trail. From America's most famous hiking destination into a collection corridor for entities that view our entire civilization as potential residents for their timeless mountain community. Story number 12. The Truth Behind the Veil. After decades of investigation, hundreds of documented encounters, and countless missing persons cases, the question that haunts every researcher who has delved into the supernatural phenomena of the Appalachian Trail isn't what exists in these ancient mountains. It's why. What purpose drives entities that possess capabilities far beyond human understanding to maintain such elaborate surveillance and collection operations along America's most famous hiking trail? The answer, when glimpsed through the accumulated evidence of 11 interconnected mysteries, reveals a truth more disturbing than any individual supernatural encounter. The Appalachian Trail serves as a testing ground where humanity itself is being evaluated by intelligences that will soon decide our species' ultimate fate. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, former director of the Appalachian Anomalies Research Project, spent 37 years documenting supernatural phenomena along the trail before making the connections that revealed the underlying purpose behind centuries of mysterious activity. Her final report, submitted to an undisclosed federal agency in December 2023, synthesized evidence from every major supernatural investigation conducted since the trail's establishment in 1921. What Morrison discovered through this comprehensive analysis transformed isolated incidents into evidence of a coordinated assessment program designed to evaluate human behavior, capabilities, and potential for evolution or elimination. According to Morrison's findings, the supernatural entities operating throughout the Appalachian Corridor aren't random manifestations of unknown phenomena, but representatives of an intelligence network that has been studying human development for millennia. The Cherokee nightland beings, the underground tunnel operators, the watchers in abandoned cabins, and every other documented entity serve specialized functions within a vast research operation designed to understand human psychology, social, behavior, technological capabilities, and evolutionary potential. The Whistling Woman's role extends beyond simple predation. She serves as a psychological screening device that identifies individuals with specific mental characteristics that make them valuable research subjects. Her ability to manipulate human emotions and decision-making through auditory stimuli provides data about cognitive vulnerabilities that could be exploited on a species-wide level. Each person who follows her song into the wilderness undergoes evaluation of their susceptibility to supernatural influence, providing information about human mental defense mechanisms and their limitations. The pale crawlers function as biological assessment specialists, studying human physical capabilities and limitations through direct observation and interaction. Their mimicry behavior serves to document human movement patterns, while their territorial activities map human navigation abilities and survival instincts. The intelligence they gather about human physical performance feeds into larger evaluations of our species' adaptive potential and biological resilience under extreme conditions. The time-slip phenomena represent controlled experiments in temporal manipulation, designed to test human psychological responses to chronological displacement and reality distortion. The entities conducting these experiments are evaluating whether humans can maintain mental stability when fundamental assumptions about time and causality are violated, gathering data about our cognitive flexibility and adaptation potential for existence in environments where normal physical laws don't apply. Morrison's analysis revealed that the shadow people serve as long-term behavioral monitoring specialists, documenting human social patterns, individual decision-making processes, and group dynamics over extended observation periods. Their surveillance network generates detailed psychological profiles of human personalities, allowing the intelligence network to predict and potentially control human behavior through targeted interventions that exploit documented individual vulnerabilities. The Cherokee warnings about forbidden peaks weren't primitive superstitions, but accurate intelligence about testing zones where human subjects underwent intensive evaluation under controlled supernatural conditions. The Nightland beings used these restricted areas to conduct experiments that would be impossible in normal environments, studying human responses to reality manipulation, entity contact, and environmental impossibility. The traditional protocols for avoiding these areas represented survival information passed down through generations of tribal encounters with the testing operations. The Lost Colony Connection revealed the historical scope of the intelligence network's human collection and study programs. The Roanoke colonists weren't the victims of random supernatural intervention, but selected subjects transported to long-term research facilities where their adaptation to supernatural environments could be monitored across multiple generations. The stone settlements found throughout the mountains represent field stations where human subjects undergo extended observation while believing they live in hidden refuges rather than research laboratories. The underground network serves as infrastructure for transporting research subjects between testing facilities while maintaining comprehensive surveillance of surface human activity. The tunnel systems allow entities to move human subjects without detection while gathering intelligence about surface civilization through observation points that provide complete coverage of the Appalachian Trail corridor. The collected hiking, equipment, and personal belongings represent archived samples of human technology and culture studied to understand our species' development trajectory. Morrison's investigation of the watchers in abandoned cabins revealed their function as human behavior analysis specialists who study our responses to isolation, abandonment, and supernatural observation. The entities occupying these structures monitor how humans react to persistent surveillance, documenting psychological breaking points and adaptation strategies that provide information about mental resilience and social dependency patterns. The disappearing trail markers represent controlled experiments in navigation disruption, designed to test human problem-solving abilities under conditions of systematic misdirection and environmental manipulation. The false blazes that replace. Legitimate markers serve to evaluate how humans respond to deceptive information, gathering data about our susceptibility to manipulation through trusted systems and authority symbols. The emergency calls from impossible locations function as communication experiments that test human responses to technological impossibility and rescue system failure. The entities conducting these tests are evaluating how humans react when fundamental assumptions about technology and safety systems are violated, gathering information about panic responses, decision-making under extreme stress, and adaptation to circumstances that challenge basic understanding of reality. The Convergence Point serves as the central headquarters where all collected data is analyzed and evaluated by the intelligence network's leadership. Morrison's research suggested that this location operates as a decision-making center where the accumulated information about human capabilities and limitations is being used to determine whether our species meets criteria for continued existence or requires intervention to prevent potential threats to larger cosmic systems. Morrison's final analysis revealed that the supernatural phenomena along the Appalachian Trail represent the concluding phase of a comprehensive species evaluation that has been ongoing for centuries. The intelligence network has been systematically documenting human behavior, psychology, technology, and evolutionary potential to determine whether we possess the wisdom and restraint necessary for advanced development or whether we represent a threat that requires containment or elimination. The evaluation criteria appear to focus on our capacity for coexistence with other intelligences, our response to supernatural phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, and our ability to maintain ethical behavior when normal social controls are removed. Every supernatural encounter along the Appalachian Trail serves as a test of human character under conditions that reveal our fundamental nature when stripped of civilizational constraints. The increase in supernatural activity documented over recent decades suggests that the evaluation period is approaching its conclusion. The entities operating from the Convergence Point appear to be conducting final assessments before implementing whatever decision they reach about humanity's future. The infrastructure improvements and communication upgrades observed at supernatural facilities indicate preparation for large-scale operations that could affect human civilization on a global level. Morrison's report concluded with the disturbing observation that the intelligence network possesses capabilities that make human resistance impossible should they decide our species requires intervention. The reality manipulation demonstrated. Through time slips, environmental impossibility, and technological disruption, indicates technological capabilities that exceed anything within human reach. Our only defense lies in demonstrating through our behavior that we deserve continued independent existence. The truth behind the supernatural phenomena of the Appalachian Trail extends far beyond regional mysteries or isolated paranormal incidents. The mountains serve as a testing laboratory where humanity itself undergoes evaluation by intelligences that possess the power to determine our species' ultimate fate. Every hiker who ventures into these ancient peaks unknowingly participates in assessments that will influence decisions about human civilization's future. The entities conducting these evaluations haven't revealed their criteria for species success or failure, leaving humanity to demonstrate our worthiness through our natural behavior under supernatural pressure, our responses to the impossible, our treatment of the vulnerable, our capacity for wisdom in the face of the unknown. All are being documented and analyzed by intelligences that view our entire civilization as subjects in an ongoing experiment, whose results will determine whether we continue to exist as an independent species. Morrison's final warning emphasized that the evaluation period may be ending soon, based on patterns of increased supernatural activity and infrastructure development. At key facilities, the intelligence network appears to be transitioning from data collection to decision implementation, suggesting that humanity may soon learn whether we have passed or failed tests we never knew we were taking. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Morrison's conclusions isn't the revelation that we're being evaluated by superior intelligences. It's the possibility that we've already failed their assessment, and the increasing supernatural activity represents preparation for implementation of whatever intervention they've decided our species requires. The question isn't whether supernatural entities control the Appalachian Mountains. It's whether they're preparing to extend that control far beyond the ancient peaks where they've been studying us for so long. The truth behind the veil may be that the supernatural phenomena of the Appalachian Trail represent humanity's final examination, and we may discover too late whether our species has earned the right to determine its own destiny, or whether that choice has already been taken from us by intelligences that view our entire civilization as nothing more than subjects in a laboratory experiment whose conclusions will reshape the future of human existence on Earth. Yet, even now, as you hear these words, the evaluation continues. Every person who walks these ancient trails, every choice made in moments of supernatural encounter, every response to the impossible and unknown, all contribute to a final assessment whose outcome remains hidden behind supernatural observations that may determine whether humanity faces a future of continued independence or finds itself subject to intervention by entities whose judgment may prove more final than any force our species has ever confronted. The Appalachian Trail remains open. The ancient paths still beckon to those seeking solitude and natural beauty. But now you know what watches from the shadows, what evaluates from the hidden places, and what decisions may await those who venture into mountains that serve as more than wilderness recreation areas. They are testing grounds where the future of human civilization hangs in the balance, waiting for a verdict from intelligences that may have already reached their conclusions about our species' worthiness to continue existing as masters of our own fate. 12 stories. Hundreds of missing hikers. Centuries of supernatural surveillance. The Appalachian Trail isn't just America's most famous hiking destination. It's a testing ground where humanity's future is being decided by intelligences that have been watching us far longer than we've been watching for them. These aren't just campfire stories or internet legends. These are documented encounters, recorded testimonies, and evidence that something vast and organized operates in the spaces between our understanding and reality. Every white blaze you follow, every shadow that moves in your peripheral vision, every moment you feel watched in the wilderness, you're participating in an evaluation whose results may determine whether our species continues to exist independently or becomes subject to intervention by entities whose judgment could prove more final than any force humanity has ever faced. The question isn't whether you believe these accounts. The question is whether you're prepared for what might be watching when you next venture into those ancient mountains. And more importantly, Are you ready to learn what other hidden truths exist in the places we think we know? If these stories have opened your eyes to the supernatural reality operating parallel to our everyday world, then you need to subscribe to Verified Fears. We investigate the mysteries that refuse to stay buried, document the phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, and reveal the truths that exist in the shadows of our civilization. Hit that subscribe button now, because the Watchers in the mountains aren't the only ones evaluating humanity. There are forces operating in every corner of our world that view us as subjects rather than masters of our own fate. Don't let ignorance be your weakness when the supernatural reveals itself in your life. Subscribe to Verified Fears, because the truth behind the veil is darker than you imagine, and knowledge might be the only defense we have left.